I was outside the diner smoking a cigarette when the cops rolled into the parking lot. The pair was in an unmarked car, which meant they were experienced. It takes time to get to the level of wearing plain clothes when you're on duty. There was only one reason a couple of high-ranking law enforcement agents would be here in Edwards, and I knew why. Everyone in town did. 3 murdered in 3 months. I've had a good sense of hearing for a long time, and as the 2 cops walked toward the diner, I could hear them discussing between themselves on how to handle the interview. Interview? Shit. I tossed my cigarette butt on the ground and offered them a pleasant smile. "Hey, y'all," I said with my drawled southern accent. "Come on in, get some breakfast. Can I get you fellas some coffee?" The 2 men were tall and well-manicured, clean-shaven faces, no-nonsense haircuts. They wore the same cologne, which I thought was funny, but their suits were different. "Sounds great, ma'am," Navy Suit said. "I take my coffee black." "Cream and sugar for me," Grey Suit said. They took a booth by the front window and I went around the counter to find Lola, bringing out 3 plates of breakfast food. The plate balancing on her forearm tilted, and I reached to grab it before it dumped eggs all over the customers sitting at the counter. "Thanks, Grace," Lola said. "Great reflexes." When you've worked at diners as long as I have, you learn how to spot accidents before they happen. Grace nodded toward our newest customers with a puzzled look. "Cops, I think," I said. "I'm getting their coffee now." I brought them their drinks and took a notepad out of my apron. The faster they ate, the faster they could leave. Everyone in the diner knew why they were here, and it was making the customers nervous. "What'll it be, boys? You seem like waffle men to me." They didn't watch my smile, but instead looked at my chest. "We're not here for breakfast, ma'am," Navy Suit said. "We're here to see you." "Me?" Grey Suit pointed to the name tag on my chest. "Your name is Grace? Grace Burton?" I nodded. Navy Suit stood and offered his hand. "I'm Detective Hartwig. This is Detective Cable. We're from upstate and have been called in to assist in the ongoing investigation." "Let me stop you right there. Detective," my voice was more acidic than necessary. "I know why you're here. Everyone does. In a town with 1,034 people. 131 people now, ma'am." I stared at my feet. Hartwig moved into the booth with his partner and pointed across the table. "Please sit. We only want to ask a few questions." "If I refuse?" Hartwig gestured to his coffee. "We could finish these at the police station." I rolled my eyes, then sat across from them. Cable removed a folder from his inner jacket pocket and scanned the papers inside. "It says here you are 62 years old." "That's correct." He smiles. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but you don't look a day over 40. "I get that a lot. I'm a vegetarian. What do you gentlemen want?" Hartwig straightened his tie. "When you were 25 years old, you were involved in an incident at this diner." My skin grew cold. "You want to know about what happened in 1987? "Yes, particularly the events that lead to the death of your boyfriend at the time." He looked at his notes. "Peter Callan." "Why do you want me to bring up painful memories, detectives?" 3 people have been murdered in Edwards over the last few months," Cable seethed. "We've been gathering information from the past about this small Mississippi town, and your file came up. There have only been 2 major incidents of homicides in Edwards, now and in 1987, and you're the only connection between the 2. Hartwig quickly added, "We aren't saying you're a suspect, mind you, but we refuse to leave any stone left unturned. We've seen the briefs about your testimony from that night, but we want to hear it from your own mouth, Ms. Burton." "Okay." I grabbed Cable's coffee for myself and took a sip. The men traded glances. My shift at the diner started late that night. I remember walking through the parking lot and being amazed. The moon was so full and bright it left shadows under the cars. I pulled my 1980 Chevy Citation into the lot and reapplied my lipstick while Bob Seger blasted over the radio. The song was from his newest album, Like a Rock. Great album, by the way. Anyway, I got out of my car and walked toward the building. Like I said, the moon was so bright that night. I'd been working at Silver Spoon Diner for 2 years, so I knew what to expect. The usuals ate earlier, before my shift started, so the only ones stopping in a diner that late were those society might deem uncouth. Truckers coming back to empty houses, randoms just passing through on their way to Jackson, insomniacs wasting another sleepless night, people running from trouble or people running toward trouble. I came into work every day with a smile on my face, and that night was no different. Wendy, another waitress, greeted me with a hug, a Marlboro Red 100 propped between her lips. Back then, everyone smoked. The diner itself could get foggy during busy hours from the second-hand smoke. Anyway, Wendy walked with me to the back while I put my personables in my locker. Since I had worked at the diner the longest, I had a copy of the key that locked the front and back doors. I slipped it in my pocket, then put on my waitress apron while Wendy went on about a new movie she'd just watched in theaters. Wendy removed her cigarette. Oh, you should have seen him, Grace. He was lifting her so high and spinning her around like she was weightless. So I should go see it. It's worth the $3.50 movie ticket price to see Patrick Swayze. When he took his shirt off, I was drooling, like literally drooling. Big whoop. You know how Peter gets when I look at other men. He's the most jealous boyfriend ever. Wendy kissed the air and rolled her eyes. More Swayze for me then. She went to help customers while I made a circuit around the kitchen. Our cook, Penny, dropped some thin bacon on the stovetop with a sizzle. He was athletic and tall, but an injury took away his chances at a football scholarship. He was hilarious, though, and worked his ass off. "What's up, G?" he called when he saw me. "It's been a slow night. You're lucky." Slow night means slow tips. Word. I feel that. I only have a few hours left until I'm out of here. Marco should be in soon to take my place. I went to the front of the diner right as a man in a tan suit came in. It was rare to find someone like that in here this late at night, but I assumed he was traveling for business or something. I took the notepad out of my apron and offered him a smile. Smiles always increase tips. "What'll you have, darling?" "Water and coffee to start." He scanned the menu. "And since my name is Toast, I'll have 3 pieces of toast. Strawberry jelly, too." I jotted down his order. "Your name is Toast?" "Robert Toast." He patted his pocket, then gave me a business card. "I'm a real estate agent. I'm traveling to Texas for a convention." He held up his briefcase. "You in the market for a new home?" I winked. "Depends how much you tip me." I left him laughing and went to the prep area to hang the ticket for Penny. Wendy found me with a worried look on her face. "He's such a fucking asshole," she whispered. "Who?" I asked. "Bill. He told me he wanted some chicken breasts. Hold the chicken." We all knew Bill. He was a trucker with irregular hours, but preferred to drive at night. He usually ate at the diner before he got on the road. He was young, around my age, and he had a thick, bushy moustache and wore very tight jeans that showed his bulge. All the waitresses at the diner knew he wore them to try to impress us, but it had the opposite effect. He was boorish, lewd, and a pervert. I told Wendy to switch customers with me, and she obliged. "Ah, Grace," Bill said as I approached him with his plate of waffles and bacon. 2 waitresses in one night. It's not the first time I've had 2 women in one night." "I doubt it." I turned to go, but he grabbed my wrist. "Hold on, girl." I jerked away. "Don't touch me." Feisty. I love him feisty. He laughed harshly. I dropped my straw on the floor. "Can you bend down and get it for me? Bend really, really low. I'll get a new one from the back." I left before he could keep being a creep and went behind the counter to help a woman sitting with her young son. She had on a button-up shirt and her name tag said Erin. It was clear she'd worked all day in retail, probably a double shift. She looked absolutely exhausted, but her child was wound up like a ball of energy. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "Hash browns and 2 waffles. Does that sound good, Jonah?" Her son tapped his little fingers on the napkin box and giggled. The noise was an irritant to his mother, who patted him gently to stop. He didn't. Feeling bad for the fatigued mother and wanting to help in any way I could, I got close to the little boy and acted like I was telling him a secret. "If you'll stay on your best behavior and don't make a mess, I'll give you some free ice cream later." Jonah's face lit up and he looked at his mother for reassurance. She nodded, then mouthed "thank you" to me. The kid stopped tapping the box and sat very still. 15 or 20 minutes went by like that. Wendy and I checked on the customers in the restaurant. Robert Toast, the real estate agent. Bill, the pervy truck driver. Erin, the mom and her little boy, Jonah. It was a small crowd, but that was expected on a random weekday night. What happened next was unexpected. My boyfriend, Peter Callan, came through the diner's front doors in a mad panic. He had blood on his arm. The customers stirred as Peter rushed to me. Grace, lock the doors." "Peter, oh my God, you're bleeding." "Lock the damn doors, something is outside." I fumbled the key out of my pocket, but Peter snatched it from my grasp. He ran to the front door and locked it, pulling at the doors to make sure the lock held. He ran past me, and I saw he had a wound on his right arm. Blood dotted the floor on his way to the back door. I heard him lock it too. "What the hell are you doing?" Bill shouted when Peter came back into the seating area. Peter jumped on one of the empty booths and peered through the large windows that faced the parking lot. Something is out there. Something big. Peter. I gently touched his back. He swung around like a frightened child. You're bleeding on the table. He looked down at his wound. Small ribbons of ripped flesh made a line along his forearm. Shit! I need to clean this up. It bit me. It fucking bit me! What did? Toast, the salesman asked, hugging his briefcase. Peter glared back through the window into the deep, dark night. I don't know. Some kind of dog or something. I came here to surprise you, Grace. I had flowers and everything, but something came out of the damn woods. It was fast. So fast. He trailed off. I took him by the hand and helped him off the booth. You're safe now. Go to the bathroom and get cleaned up. Unlock the fucking doors first, Bill shouted. I gotta leave soon. Please stop cursing around my son, Erin shouted back. Peter looked around the room. I had to lock the doors. If that thing got in. He trailed off again and searched the faces of everyone. Wendy and Penny were standing by the food pickup area, watching intently at what was going on. Peter was always one to lead in a sticky situation. Me, Penny, and Wendy knew that. He was shrewd and didn't spook easily, so his unraveled temperament made us all a little nervous. Something had happened, something he couldn't wrap his head around. Peter continued, I'll get cleaned up and then we can call the police. He held his stomach and winced. I'll unlock the doors when they get here. It's not safe outside. Brr. He disappeared into the men's bathroom while Bill protested. Everyone ignored him. Me, Penny, and Wendy knew if Peter was advising everyone to stay inside, then everyone should listen. A raccoon bites him and he wants to call the police, Bill shouted. This is bullshit. I felt the need to defend my boyfriend. If Peter says we should stay, then that's what we should do. You don't know what's out there. Bill lit a cigarette and puffed out a plume of smoke under his moustache. He sarcastically looked out the window and pointed the lit end of his cigarette at the glass. I see a few parked cars, some trees, and a big full moon, that's it. Toast clutched his briefcase and looked back toward the bathrooms. Do you hear that? His question was interrupted by a question from Erin. Cops. Why does he want to call the cops? Jonah was scared now from all the shouting. His eyes never left the dots of Peter's blood on the tiled floor. Cops have guns. Guns mean safety, Penny said from behind his kitchen window. Bill shook his head. Cops won't do anything except laugh their asses off when they find an overgrown rat running through the parking lot. A rat couldn't do that to Peter's arm, Wendy objected. I'm not going outside until the cops get here. I hear something, the salesman said again. No one paid him any attention. Emotions were too high. Wendy leaned against a wall, wringing a dry towel out over and over again. Are there bears in Mississippi? Is there a bear outside? A lion, a tiger, a bear, oh my, Bill said with a huff. Penny said, this discussion is ridiculous. Everyone stays put until we know what's going on. Bill stubbed his cigarette into an ashtray. A low-life fry cook isn't going to tell me what to do. Stay in the kitchen and keep your mouth shut. Penny hopped through the pickup area window and paced past the counter. Or what? What the hell are you going to do if I don't? Bill and Penny got into each other's faces while Wendy and I shouted for them to cool down. Erin shouted for everyone to stop scaring her child. Jonah was frowning now, tears welling in his eyes from the confrontation. The shouting intensified and emotions ran high. A fight was about to break out. Shut up and listen, Toast shouted. Everyone stopped and turned to him. He was shaking and staring at the door to the men's bathroom. Peter was in there. Do you hear that? And we did. It was a light, crunching sound. The patter of something hitting against the bathroom walls came from behind the door, and the entire group took a step closer to hear it better. Peter, I called out, are you okay? He might have passed out from blood loss, Penny said. His comment cinched my heart tightly. My boyfriend was not only wounded, he could potentially die. The thought crushed me. I started toward the bathroom door and twisted the knob. As soon as the door's latch disengaged, the door was rocketed open, hitting me back several feet. My eyesight went blurry, and I felt a knot swelling on my forehead. My world spun around before finally coming back to focus on the open bathroom door. I thought I'd find Peter, apologizing for accidentally knocking me to the ground. But it wasn't Peter. It was something else. Oh my God, I mumbled, and scurried backwards on the cold floor, away from the monstrosity that was before me. A thick, furry body stood on 4 powerful legs. Clawed paws clattered on the tile floor. The head was oddly human, and familiar. "Peter?" I asked, astonished. What remained of Peter's face bent and gnarled under some internal pressure. His strong chin jutted forward into elongated jaws. His forehead scrunched down, forming the slope of a canine skull. His eyes drew back, the irises milking over, then darkening like ink had been spilled into them. He opened his mouth, and a guttural moan escaped, but not before his nose jutted forward and developed into a snarling snout. Wendy ran over and helped me to my feet. Everyone watched in horror as my boyfriend changed. Now, standing before us in the small hallway that led to the bathrooms, was no longer Peter, but some kind of bizarre wolf-like creature with a thick grey mane and hairy muscles rippling over its body. Black, soulless eyes regarded my wide-eyed stare. Tall, hairy ears twitched and jerked at sounds unheard by human ears. The creature lifted its lips to reveal a set of incredible teeth, jagged, sharp, numerous. It looked more like the mouth of something out of the depths of the ocean than something that would live on land. The jaws unhinged, the lips drew back farther, and a deafening howl echoed around the diner. We all covered our ears, but the volume and pitch seemed to rattle me to my core. The terrifying sound thrust everyone into action. Bill lunged for the door and pulled the handles with all his might. The lock held. Toast scrambled over his table and fell onto the ground, his briefcase still gripped in his hands. Then he followed Wendy and Penny, who jumped behind the counter. Erin and Jonah ran to the far side of the diner and squatted between the jukebox and a booth. I stood there, staring stupidly at the thing that used to be my boyfriend. "Grace!" Penny yelled. "Get over here!" My legs churned toward the counter just as the wolf leapt away from the bathroom. It moved with unbelievable speed, dodging potted plants and cardboard boxes with deft athleticism. I dove headlong over the counter and crashed into Wendy. We heard Bill scream. Penny slowly lifted his eyes above the counter. His face went pale and slack. Then we squatted down again. He tucked his legs against his chest and put his head on his knees. Bill's wet pleas were replaced by grotesque sounds that filled the diner, a chorus of ripping flesh and snapping bones. I went to look, but Penny clutched my arm and held me down. He shook his head intently. Whatever was happening, he didn't want me to witness it. We all stared at one another in complete shock until the noises of violence stopped. They were replaced by deep inhalations from near the front door, the sound a bloodhound makes when it discovers the scent of a favorite quarry. Claws clacked against the diner's floor. Peter, or whatever it was moving away from the door and toward the corner of the room, toward the jukebox. Erin and Jonah didn't have much time. I reached across Wendy, who silently sobbed, and grabbed a glass of Coca-Cola out of the mini-fridge. I hurled it toward the other side of the restaurant, and it smashed loudly against the wall. The slow-paced click-clack of canine paws stopped, turned, then jolted toward the sound. I crawled to the far end of the counter and found the mother and her son in an embrace, heads buried into each other's shoulders. "Erin," I whispered. She turned and saw me, and I waved her over. They left their spot behind the corner booth and ran to us. Peter was faster. The force at which the wolf thing hit them slammed them into the jukebox. Sparks shot out, then the internal mechanism began to play something, but the speed at which it played was so slow the instruments and voice formed hollow, wailing bass notes. I reached out for the both of them, finding a small hand and latching onto it. I pulled with all my might to get them to safety behind the counter. It was only Erin. Jonah's neck was fixed tightly between powerful jaws, and his gurgling protests were immediately halted with a snap of teeth. I covered Erin's mouth to prevent her from screaming while Penny held her, back from doing something as stupid as trying to take on the beast bare-handed. It was no use. Her son was dead. My heart sank with the thought that Jonah would never get the ice cream I promised him. Penny forcibly pulled the mother into the far side of the L-shaped counter. Wendy, Toast, and I followed, scooting on the ground as silently as we could. My heart beat so loudly I knew Peter would be able to hear it with those monstrous ears. We all collected into the small space behind the counter, a huddled mass of appalled, anxious people who had no idea what was happening, people who had no idea how it was happening. The warbled, low-pitched music seeping through the damaged jukebox ceased, and there was a sudden, palpable stillness in the air. Deep inhalations started again, as did the soft clacks of claws on tile. Peter had transformed into something murderous, something evil, a predator eager to slip some more prey between its teeth. Fortunately, The posture of being on all fours prevented him from easily seeing over the countertop, thank God. I didn't know what was going on, but I did know that once Peter turned the corner, we'd all be sitting ducks. We had to get out of sight. I motioned for Penny to go over the counter. He understood immediately, but Erin was pale as a sheet. Her eyes were glossed over. A look of dissociation etched on her face. Her limbs were noodles. The only way to get her over the counter was to toss her over. Peter moved closer, his deep breaths echoing off the wall that housed the jukebox. Wendy went over first while Penny manipulated Erin. She didn't fight or talk. Toast wept silently while he slid over the smooth counter, doing a bad job of staying low and out of sight from Peter. I aided Penny with Erin, then he slid over too, just as I saw long whiskers jut from the other side of the aisle. The dark curve of a canine nose passed the threshold just as I slid over the opposite side of the counter. Now we were back where we started, near the hallway, but we were out of sight from whatever the hell Peter had transformed into. Our backs were against the wooden foundation of the counter. To our left was the men's bathroom. To the right was Bill's body, and the front door. The door! I checked my pockets for the key before remembering that Peter, human Peter, had taken it. We were trapped inside. Wendy touched my shoulder and pointed toward the stationary stools lined under the counter. She motioned there, then back, signaling we had to get into the kitchen area. It was mostly enclosed and was the only place to hide. However, we would have to sneak past Peter to get there. It was our only option. I nodded, then tapped Penny. Before I could gesture, Erin jumped to her feet. Our attempts to stop her were in vain. Erin grabbed a steak knife from the counter and dove over the edge. She wailed her son's name, bringing the knife up and down in a savage cutting motion. The rest of us looked at one another in rapt amazement. There was a sharp cracking of glass and of cans tumbling from their homes on shelves. Then the scream started. Knowing we were powerless to save her, we crawled like toddlers around the stationary stools, willing ourselves to stay low to avoid being seen, or from seeing the devastation so close to us. We reached the short arm of the L and hesitated. Peter was crunching on something wet and tough. Between each slurp slipped out an unsatiated growl. He wanted more. Penny was the first to hop through the open space of the counter and into the kitchen. He held the door open for Wendy. She hesitated once, found her inner strength, and made it across. I was next, and my legs felt like they were formed out of concrete. I concentrated on the door, on the signaling hands and faces of my co-workers, and began to push myself toward them. Toast blasted past me, causing me to stumble. He sauntered through the door. I was left exposed in the middle of the open area. Peter was lying down on the rubber mat next to the soda dispenser. He faced away from me. Thank God for small mercies. What wasn't merciful was what he was doing to Erin's body. An arm, severed at the shoulder, lay parallel to his bushy tail. Her torso rocked back and forth with every hinge of his jaws on her flesh. Her head lolled lazily on a bloody neck. Her lifeless eyes piercing me like they were willing me to continue, to go on, to move, damn it. I did. With the four of us out of view in the kitchen, Penny flipped the small door bolt that fed into the floor. It wasn't much protection against what lay outside, so he began to stack boxes and crates against the door as silently as he could. He was sweating, his lips forming a soft prayer with each additional pound placed against the door for our protection. Every rattle of glass or tinkle of metal made me flinch. "Is the back door locked?" Wendy whispered. I nodded. Peter locked it too. She wiped her eyes and gave me a combative stare. Did he do that because he knew what was about to happen? Had the situation not called for silence, I would have slapped her. Peter, or at least the old Peter I knew, would never do something like this. He had a good heart. He loved people. He loved me. I held her hands in my own. Peter would never do that, you know that. Something changed him. A fresh stream of tears rolled down her cheeks. Then what do we do since both exits are locked? Toast was close now, eavesdropping to see what plan I would come up with. Penny stacked a cardboard box full of paper towels on the top of his barrier, then joined the group. He too was waiting to hear our next move. Peter took my keys with him when he went into the bathroom. They must still be in there. And, Penny whispered, we need to get them. Toast sat on the floor and brought his briefcase into his lap. Penny looked toward his makeshift barrier. How do you expect us to do that? We have to trap Peter or what? Or fight. The small serving window became alive with violent life. Peter's canine head filled the space and we all jumped back in surprise. The creature squirmed and jerked its torso, but it couldn't fit through the small opening. Sharp teeth snapped together like the sound of grotesque chimes. The movement shot globs of gore toward us, pieces of Erin. "We're trapped! We're trapped!" Wendy screamed. "No, we're not," Penny announced. He had a saucepan in his hands. It was filled with the hot grease from the fry station he used for French fries. He turned to me. "It's time to fight." Before I could respond, Penny stepped toward Peter and hurled the hot grease onto his face. Skin sizzled, flesh bubbled. The smell of burning dog fur filled the kitchen. Peter fell away from the counter, whimpering and pawing at his snout. The four of us backed away to the far side of the kitchen, each finding something as a weapon: a knife, a ladle, a skillet, a broom. Our tools were meager, but they gave us a sense of comfort to have something in our hands. The barking shrieks of pain eventually softened to whines. Then Peter was silent. We didn't dare look into the window to see where he was. Instead, we huddled together on the kitchen floor, silently praying that someone would find us soon. We stayed like that for a long time. An hour, maybe 3 hours. Once fear overtakes your brain, time loses all meaning. Eventually, Toast began to weep. "I lied," he mumbled through his tears. Wendy grabbed his shoulder. "What are you talking about?" "I lied about being a real estate agent." He shook his head and stared at the dirty tile between his legs. "I used to be a real estate agent, but not anymore." I touched his hand, knowing he was having a breakdown. "It's okay, Toast." "No, it's not." He wiped the snot from his nose. "I made a few bad deals, got into debt. Then I made a few more bad deals, and now my wife has left me and taken the kids. I'm a failure at real estate, a failure of a husband, a failure as a father." I touched his briefcase. "I thought you were going to Texas for a convention." His expression grew solemn when he spun the briefcase around and opened it. "I lied about that too. I was going to use this on myself in the parking lot. There were no papers in the briefcase, no folders full of files or real estate contracts. The only item was a pistol." "Holy shit," Penny whispered. "Is that thing loaded?" Toast nodded. "I figured if I was going to die, then why not have one last meal? I found this diner and decided I'd do it here, away from my family." Toast planted his head on his knees and began to sob. While Penny and Wendy consoled Toast, I secretly grabbed the pistol and checked the magazine. Toast was telling the truth. The pistol was fully loaded. Suddenly my plan to fetch the key became a lot easier. "Where are you going?" Wendy asked when I got to my feet. "I'm going to get the key. We have to get the fuck out of here." I ignored Penny and Wendy's protests and bellied up to the service window. Bloody paw prints made laps around the counter and dining area, but I didn't see Peter. I knew he was close, though. I eased out of the window, but when my feet touched the group, there was a loud clang. I held my breath, wondering what the hell I landed on. Then there was another clang, and another. Grace, let me in." Marco, the backup cook, was standing outside the front door. He waved and smiled at me as I stood there in disbelief. Clang, clang. He knocked on the glass door again and yelled, "Hurry up, Grace. Why are the doors locked? Wait, oh shit, are you holding a gun?" Then he looked down and saw the mangled body of Bill. A rabid snarl erupted down the hallway before a blur of fury charged. Marco only had time to brace himself before the hulking mass of fur and teeth exploded through the doors, buckling them off the hinges and sending shards of glass into the parking lot. Marco, now covered in small scratches, quickly got to his feet and sprinted toward his car. Peter lay on what was left of the doors, and I knew that Marco would make it. He'd get into his car, speed toward town, and soon every police officer in 100 miles would be here to save us. Then something dashed out of the dark woods and tackled Marco. It was another wolf creature, bigger than Peter. I gasped and held the pistol tighter. It was the one that originally bit Peter. It had been waiting in the woods, waiting for us to escape the confines of the building. It had set a trap. Knowing both creatures were at the front of the diner made a light bulb go off in my brain. The back door. We could escape through the back door. I ran into the bathroom where Peter had begun his transformation. Tattered clothes and blood littered the area. I found his jeans, well, parts of his jeans, and searched through damp pockets. My treasure hunt was successful. I held the key up high like a mighty scepter. All I had to do now was unlock the back door and gather everyone through it. From there we could climb onto the roof and wait this thing out. We could spy on the creatures from above and stay quiet. My plan was foolproof. What I didn't expect was that all the commotion going on alerted the people in the kitchen. They found the front door busted open. No creatures were in sight. No sounds were audible. To them, it appeared the coast was clear to make a break for it. It was like watching something in slow motion when they left the safety of the kitchen. I spotted Penny first. He leapt over the broken door and made a break for his car. Wendy was behind him, sprinting toward her own car in the hopes that once she was inside it, she was safe. Then there was Toast, who tripped on some glass and landed squarely on his ass right outside the diner. I yelled out for them to return, but my screams were muffled by a pair of harsh howls. I saw two dark shapes maneuver around the parked cars and interrupt my co-workers' getaways. Claws tore through flesh, teeth ripped bone, tongues lapped up blood. I witnessed both creatures turn their attention to Toast, who was still sitting and sobbing as I unlocked the back door. Toast had lost his mind in the ongoing situation. He lifted his hands in subservience, mumbling incoherent wishes for these beasts to take away all his pain. He begged those gods of the night to end his suffering. The screams I heard as I exited the building was enough evidence to know they answered his prayers. My escape was quiet, but my run to the wall ladder was not. I tripped over a cardboard box, then slipped on some grease leaking out of a garbage can. Once I found the ladder, I conquered the rungs as fast as possible. But they were so damn fast. In an instant they were around the corner and lunged for my legs. The bigger one missed, but Peter's teeth grazed one of my calf muscles. I yelled in pain but kept moving up. My hands felt the cold rooftop and I hoisted myself over the roof ledge. I risked a peek over the edge to find the creatures were more intelligent than I'd believed. They were attempting to climb the fucking ladder. I aimed the pistol, eyed the sight, switched off the safety, and fired a round. The big one toppled over, a gory hole in the center of its skull. Its death did nothing to hinder Peter's ascent. Long claws gripped the rungs in cumbersome ways as he made his way to me. I fired a shot at Peter, my boyfriend, the man I loved. It struck his shoulder, but didn't stop his progress. Now he was within striking distance of me, so I squirmed back to the far edge of the roof. A pair of furry ears sprouted above the ledge, and I let off another round, then another. Peter continued. I noticed how dark it had become outside. The once brilliant full moon was slipping past the horizon. Peter was nothing but a monstrous silhouette as he planted his paws on the roof. He no longer stayed on all fours, but erected himself to his hind legs. He charged. I fired what remained of the bullets to the mass of motion and violence charging at me. Once the gun stopped firing, the magazine empty, I closed my eyes and waited for my death. Obviously you didn't die, Detective Hartwig said. What happened? Detective Cable looked at the documents in the folder. Your original testimony says that when you opened your eyes you found Peter dead. He was shot in the shoulder, the chest, and the head. I nodded. Yes, Peter was on the roof with me, human Peter. The detectives traded glances. I knew they didn't believe me. Just like the other police officers who arrived after the sun came up that day in 1987. Neighbors had heard the gunshots and called them. They arrived at a scene of carnage. 100 explanations were presented, none of them similar to my story about what actually happened. There must have been some kind of cover-up. I shouldn't have expected anything differently. What about the farmer? Hartwig asked. Richard Bowler, I answered. He'd been missing from his home that night, according to his wife. She said he had been bitten by a large dog a few weeks prior. He was the bigger creature that originally bit Peter. After I shot him, he returned to human form. Human form, right, Cable rolled his eyes. Hartwig offered a fake smile. You've been very helpful, Grace. The men gathered their folder and stood up from the table. It was clear they thought I was insane or outright lying. I wish I had been lying. My life would be so much different had I not gone into work that day. Hartwig gave me his card. We're leading the investigation into the 3 missing people here in Edwards. If you remember anything else, don't hesitate to call. I took the card and nodded, knowing I would never call. There was plenty of information I could have told them that they didn't know, like how I knew exactly what happened to the missing people, like how careful I'd been all these years, only to slip up over the last 3 months. If I remember anything, I'll definitely give you a call. Thanks, officers. I hope you find what you're looking for. As they left the diner, I felt an itch on my calf. I scratched the spot where Peter had bitten me all those years ago. Even in his altered state, Peter had left me with a gift so remarkable I've had to hide it from the world. Normally I like to hunt in different states 1,000 miles away from Mississippi, but recently I've been lazy. Prowling Edwards was a stupid idea, and I'd have to be smarter from now on. The next full moon is in 2 weeks. I haven't decided where I should hunt next. "14 days. It has been 14 days since my little brother and his friends were declared missing. 14 days since my family heard anything from Peter. He could be difficult, but he'd never just disappear like this. Peter and his 2 friends, Michael and Corey, fancied themselves urban explorers. They enjoyed creeping through crumbling malls and abandoned theaters that people whispered were haunted. The police had searched every likely spot within 100 miles and found nothing but old squatters and empty spaces. They shrugged it off, convinced Peter and his friends had taken off for spring break. But Peter's phone, always glued to his hand, had gone straight to voicemail, and it stayed that way. Frustrated with the lack of progress, I took a leave of absence from my job and returned to my hometown, determined to find Peter myself. The first place I went was our childhood home. It was early morning when I arrived, and the house was quiet, or so I thought. My parents were awake, moving through the house like ghosts, their eyes hollow and tired. They hadn't slept. How could they? Peter's room was a disaster, made worse by the police rummaging through it for clues. His computer sat untouched in the corner. When I turned it on, I was greeted by my first obstacle, a password. I tore through his desk, notebooks, and every scrap of paper I could find, desperate for a clue. A poster of some grungy, tattooed band caught my eye. Vexor. Peter loved that band. I typed the name into the computer. Incorrect, it said, bouncing back. I sighed, leaning back in his chair, frustration bubbling up. The room felt suffocating, as if Peter's absence left a void I couldn't fill. Then I caught sight of the poster again, reflected in the mirror. Backwards. Vexor read Roxev. It was a long shot, but I typed it in. The screen unlocked. I exhaled, a small victory in a sea of uncertainty. I clicked through his files until I found a chat between Peter, Michael, and Corey. One message stood out, a link to a YouTube channel called The Unexplained Adventurers Club. I clicked through their videos, which were well-edited shots of the 3 boys exploring decaying buildings and forgotten places. The latest video was of them at an old mill on the outskirts of town, and in the final minutes, they mentioned their next destination, St. Dismas Asylum. I googled the asylum and immediately felt a chill. It was an old, abandoned place, shut down decades ago amid rumors of human experiments. The photos online were grainy, but enough to show a crumbling building shrouded in decay. The idea of Peter and his friends exploring that place made my stomach twist. Still, if that's where they'd gone, that's where I'd have to go. The drive to St. Dismas was long and oppressive. The sky darkened as I left the highway, and the back roads leading to the asylum were barely roads at all, mostly. Just dirt paths winding through thick woods that seemed to close in around me. The trees were lifeless, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. My headlights barely cut through the gloom, and with each mile, the silence grew heavier. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw it. St. Dismas sat perched on a hill, towering over everything like a malevolent giant. It looked wrong, almost as if it was leaning toward me, beckoning me closer. The building's jagged silhouette was barely visible against the night sky, but it exuded an aura of decay and abandonment. Yet even from a distance I felt eyes on me, like the asylum itself was watching. I should have stopped. I should have turned back. But as I neared the gate, I spotted a Jeep Grand Cherokee, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. My heart hammered in my chest. It was the same Jeep the boys had last been seen in. I pulled up alongside it and stepped out, the cold night air biting at my skin. My flashlight beam swept over the Jeep, and dread coiled in my stomach. 2 tires were flat, as if they had driven over something sharp. My breath caught as I tried the doors, but they were locked tight. The back hatch gave way after a few tugs, and I climbed inside. The keys were still in the ignition, but the engine wouldn't turn. The battery was dead. I rummaged through the glove box and found the insurance papers. Michael Cromwell. I was right. It was their car. But where were they? I checked my phone again. No signal. Of course, I could go back, try to find service, but the thought of leaving them behind felt like abandoning them. I had to keep going. The gatehouse beside the fence had a faint glow coming from inside. I hesitated, then entered, My nerves frayed with every step. The light inside flickered, casting long, wavering shadows. An old computer sat in the corner, but it was the bright orange button on the wall that caught my eye. It had to be for the gate. With a deep breath, I pressed it. The gates groaned as they slowly creaked open, their rusted hinges screaming in the silence. I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. For a moment I stood frozen, staring at the gaping entrance. There was no turning back now. I passed through the gates, and they slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the air like a final warning. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dry, brittle ground beneath my feet. The earth seemed dead, drained of life, much like the trees that stood sentinel around the asylum. In the distance, I spotted a single light in one of the upper windows. It shouldn't have been there. There was no reason for a place like this to still have power. I made my way to the front doors, their heavy oak frames bound with thick chains and a rusted padlock. I shook them, but they wouldn't budge. My flashlight beam flickered as I peered through the grimy windows. Inside, I could see the outline of an old waiting room, but there was no movement, no sign of life. I swept the light around, looking for a way in, but the shadows seemed to twist and dance just out of reach, taunting me. I figured there must be a similar orange button inside the lobby to open the front gate again. There had to be, or else I would be trapped here. Then I noticed the footprints. 3 sets, leading around the side of the building, directly under the window with the light. I followed them, my flashlight flickering as if struggling against the oppressive darkness. The prints led to a metal trellis climbing the side of the stone wall. Several bars were broken, and my heart raced as I realized this was how Peter and his friends had entered. I looked up at the window, the only sign of life in this dead place. I had no signal, no backup, and no way out until I found them. I took a deep breath, gripping the trellis. The metal flexed under my weight, but I climbed anyway, feeling the pull of something far darker than I'd expected waiting for me inside. Hand over hand, I went until my fingers scraped against the rough stone of the windowsill, and with a final heave, I pulled myself into the room, only to stumble and land hard on my chin, a cloud of dust erupting around me. Cursing under my breath, I rolled to my feet, the silence in the room heavy and oppressive, wrapping around me like a shroud. The administrative room was oddly preserved, an old bank teller's lamp casting a weak glow over a desk cluttered with disheveled papers. Despite the dust covering nearly everything, some sheets bore the official stamp of St. Dismas, their pages oddly missing a layer, a dust as though someone had been examining them recently. I rifled through the documents, noting the sterile language detailing procedures and consents that felt cold and clinical. A low hum pulsed in the air, reminiscent of faulty electrical wires crackling somewhere in the depths of the building. As I approached the door, a sudden crash echoed through the hallway, sharp and disorienting. My heart raced as panic surged within me. I was seconds away from bolting back through the window when I hesitated. Peter could be in danger. I couldn't abandon him, even if fear gnawed at my insides. That sound was heavy and metallic, but might have been the boys. What if they were trying to escape from somewhere? The thought froze me momentarily, but I steeled myself, pushed down the dread, and opened the door to the hallway. Peering into the murky darkness of St. Dismas, I aimed my flashlight into the gloom. A long, hospital-style corridor unfolded before me, lined with doors that whispered secrets. Some were slightly ajar, as if beckoning me closer, while others were locked tight, guarding their horrors. A crooked sign hung on the wall, the word Administration Wing scrawled in blood-red letters. I quickly checked my phone, praying for a signal, but the screen remained obstinately blank. With every step I took, the linoleum floor creaked, each echo amplifying my sense of vulnerability. Then I heard it, a faint dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled along the floor above me. My heart raced. Was it Peter? Or was it someone, or something else lurking in the shadows? Perhaps a deranged ex-patient, or a sadistic doctor conducting nightmarish experiments on the unwitting. A shiver danced down my spine. Calling out would be foolish. I needed to remain hidden, to find the source of the noise before it found me. At the end of the hallway, I rounded a corner and stepped into a grand atrium that soared up to what I guessed was the 4th or 5th floor. A secondary staircase spiraled down from the 2nd level, where another crooked sign announced, "Basement." From below, the low thrum of machinery struggled, a generator fighting to keep this forsaken place alive. I turned away from the darkness of the basement, drawn instead to the staircase leading up to where the earlier crash had sounded, and where my brother might still be. The elevator loomed beside the staircase as I ascended to the third floor, its shaft a gaping, rusted wound in the building. The cage doors were twisted, and the cables creaked under the weight of time. I didn't need to be told that stepping inside would be a death sentence. At the top of the stairs, another crooked sign greeted me, reading, "Treatment." The air was different here. It was heavy and oppressive, like a smothering blanket. It felt as though the walls themselves were watching, warning me to turn back. Halfway down the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, light spilling out into the gloom. Something had been dragged across the floor. The linoleum was scarred with long, jagged marks, each one twisting like an omen of what lay ahead. My breath quickened as I moved toward the light, the ground shifting beneath me as if protesting my every step. The door groaned as I pushed it open, the sound an unwelcome intrusion in the silence. The room beyond was bathed in the cold, sterile light of ancient machines. Their blinking lights seemed too alive for a place so devoid of life. At the center of it all, sitting ominously in the middle of the room, was an old leather hospital chair. It was empty except for Peter's camera. I recognized it immediately. His name was etched into the bottom, a habit of his. My hand shook as I picked it up, the cold plastic sending a shiver down my spine. I turned it on. The footage was mundane at first. Peter and his friends driving up the hill to St. Dismas, laughing, joking. Then it cut to them climbing the trellis. It felt too familiar. The static that followed was jarring, but the next scene froze me in place. Peter, alone in a dark room, his face drawn tight with fear. "Don't let it touch you," he said in a shaky voice. A shadow shifted behind him, barely noticeable until it loomed, drawing closer. Peter shouted, then nothing. The screen flickered, and static returned. A noise behind me shattered the trance. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy. Something was coming down the stairs from the fourth floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to the footfalls, each one reverberating through the floor. Whoever, or whatever it was, they were close, too close. The light in the room was a beacon, a flashing sign that someone had been here. I cursed under my breath and moved to the door, peeking into the hall. The footsteps paused, the silence more terrifying than any sound, and then they resumed faster, closer. I darted into the hallway, my movements frantic as I spotted another open door across the hall. I slipped inside, turning off my flashlight and squeezing beneath an old gurney. The camera was still in my hand, its weight a reminder of why I was here. I pressed myself into the shadows, my breath shallow and uneven. The heavy footfalls reached the room I had just left. A crash followed, loud and violent, as if something or someone was tearing the place apart. A low, guttural growl pierced the air, feral and raw. My stomach twisted in fear, and I prayed the thing wouldn't find me. Suddenly, the light from across the hall went dark. I stifled a gasp as the footsteps returned, this time stopping just outside my hiding place. The door flew open with a loud bang, the force shaking the walls. A shadow loomed in the doorway. It was a hulking figure, its body too large, too monstrous. The thing wasn't human. Its head barely fit through the frame, and it had to stoop to look inside. Ragged, uneven breaths filled the room, accompanied by an unsettling, wet, sniffling sound, like its lungs were struggling to draw breath. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from screaming. My body trembled with fear, my limbs refusing to obey as I clutched the camera tighter, willing myself to become invisible. The creature moved deeper into the room, its bulk casting long shadows across the floor. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I could only watch, helpless as it scoured the space. And then, just as suddenly, it turned away. The heavy steps shuffled back down the hallway, leaving the door wide open in its wake. The danger wasn't gone, but I had seconds. I had to move. With my legs trembling and sweat beading on my brow, I crept through the open door into the hallway, following the beast's trail. Keeping my flashlight off, I pressed my back to the wall and slid toward the staircase leading down to the second floor. My goal was simple: to reach the open window I had entered through. Forget the security gate. I'd dig my way out if I had to. The lights flickered ominously as I made my way to the second floor. Then, in an instant, they died, plunging the asylum into total darkness. A series of metallic clangs rang out, making me flinch. I barely had time to react before a security gate slammed down inches from my face, the force of it almost knocking me over. The gate's weight and speed were terrifying, nearly crushing me. Suddenly, a savage roar pierced the silence from above, rattling the very walls. I dropped into a crouch, whipping my flashlight toward the third-floor staircase. The pounding of fists on metal echoed down the stairwell, shaking me out of my hesitation. The beast was there, trapped behind another gate. I had no time. Without power, I couldn't get past this gate. Lifting it was futile, it barely budged an inch. The only option left was to descend into the basement and restart the generator. Another crash reverberated from above as I stared into the basement's black maw. My stomach turned with dread, but there was no choice. Step after step, I descended into the darkness. Each metal stair groaned under my weight, echoing in the silence. The basement was wet with filthy sludge from years of neglect coated the floor, soaking through my shoes as I splashed down the final steps. The steady drip of water echoed ominously from the far end of the hall. My flashlight illuminated the decrepit elevator at the bottom. It was a rusted, old-fashioned cage door, hung open like a trap waiting to snap shut. Ignoring it, I made my way past empty, forgotten rooms, their shelves filled with decaying medical equipment. At the hallway's end stood a large set of double doors. The generator had to be beyond them. The smell of diesel thickened the air, making me dizzy as I approached. Inside, my light revealed a row of hulking diesel generators, their orange paint peeling like dead skin. Wires sprawled across the floor like tangled vines. I scratched my head, unsure of how to get them running, when my flashlight caught sight of another video camera placed on a workbench. It was focused on the generators, left behind, just like the last one. The camera was dead, but I slid the SD card into Peter's camera. My heart raced as I hit play, hoping to understand what happened to the boys. The video flickered to life, showing Corey's face as he set up the camera in the corner. He stepped back, joining the others near the generator. "You see, guys, this old dinosaur runs off diesel. Help me roll one of those full barrels under the fuel line," Corey instructed, motioning to the red barrels on the side. The three boys grunted and strained, moving a barrel close to the pump. Corey switched the fuel line to the fresh barrel. "Now what?" Peter asked, clearly uneasy. "Now we crank it," Corey replied, pushing a large steel lever several times before slamming the red button. The generator roared to life, flooding the basement with harsh, flickering light. The boys cheered and high-fived, oblivious to what awaited them. I fast-forwarded through the rest of the video, seeing nothing new. The footage ended with the boys leaving the basement. They never came back for the camera. Pocketing the SD cards, I turned my attention to the generator. The barrel Corey set up was empty. I banged on it, the hollow sound confirming it was useless. After searching the room, I found only one barrel left with a fraction of its fuel remaining. Grunting, I heaved it over and swapped the fuel line. Sweat dripped down my neck as I pushed the crank lever, using all my strength. On the fifth push, I slammed the red button. The generator sputtered, then roared to life. The lights flickered on, and I heard the distant metallic groan of security gates rising. The beast was free. My heart pounded as I ran from the room, splashing through the filthy water. The wet muck coated me as I sprinted back toward the staircase. Knowing I had mere moments, the beast had been stuck on the third floor, but now the gates were open. My footsteps splashed and squelched as I reached the base of the metal staircase, panic flooding me. And then I heard it, the sound I dreaded most. Heavy footsteps. The beast was coming. Its monstrous form barreled down the stairs, a screech tearing from its throat. I froze, terror rooting me in place. My beam of light fell on it. It was twisted, grotesque, more monstrous than I could have imagined. The stairs warped and twisted under its weight as it charged me, jaws gnashing, and I could only think of Peter's warning. "Don't let it touch you." At the last second, instinct took over. I dove into the open elevator, wrenching the rusted steel grate shut behind me. The beast slammed into the bars, its deformed face inches from mine. I fell back in horror, shining the light in its eyes. The thing's body was swollen and thick, its skin a sickly green. Its gut sagged, making it look almost comical, but there was nothing funny about its strength. Its eyes were blue and too human. They stared at me with a twisted intelligence. They were so similar to Peter's eyes. The realization hit me like a hammer, but I had no time to dwell on it. The creature roared, smashing its fists into the gate. I flinched as the rusted steel buckled slightly, struggling to contain its fury. Its flesh rippled and twisted, and I watched in horror as its right arm contorted. bones cracking and reshaping into a long, insect-like claw. I kicked the rusted elevator lever in desperation. It snapped off, but the gears groaned, and the elevator jolted upward. I heard the beast scream as its arm got caught in the metal, snapping with a sickening crunch. The thing collapsed to the floor below as the elevator rattled its way up. Shaking, I watched the basement disappear, leaving the monster and its terrifying form behind. But my relief was short-lived. The elevator was old, and the cable groaned in protest, straining under the weight. I felt every shudder in my bones. The lift creaked to a halt on the 4th floor, and I scrambled out the moment the gate clicked open. As I leapt out, I looked back down the shaft where the beast still lay, writhing in the dim light. I turned to the floor I now found myself on and squinted at the crooked sign hanging in the dimly lit hallway. Laboratory, it read, the mockingly red letters glowing against the peeling paint. The flickering lights overhead cast eerie shadows, igniting a surge of doubt and fear within me. I needed to escape, but deep down, I knew the beast lurking in the depths of this place would cut me off before I could reach the 2nd floor. I could almost hear its heavy, deliberate steps echoing up the steel staircase from the basement, drawing closer with each heartbeat. My immediate goal was clear. I had to hit the button in the lobby and find a way to the 2nd floor window, my only potential escape route. This decrepit structure might be falling apart, but it was my only chance to get out alive. While I still had time, I decided to explore the mysteries hidden within these walls. The 4th floor of St. Dismas was a maze of confusion, featuring only 2 doors. One was caved in, remnants of a roof that had given way long ago. The other opened into an ancient laboratory, where large, sci-fi-looking machines crowded every available space. The lab was divided into sections filled with strange equipment and workstations, remnants of forgotten experiments. I trudged deeper into the room, searching for a suitable hiding spot as dread coiled in my stomach. In the far corner stood 2 of the weirdest machines I'd ever seen. They resembled transporters from Star Trek, but with metallic tubes snaking around them, giving them a sinister aura. A series of dials and blinking lights covered their surfaces, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. On a nearby desk lay the last camera, smeared with sticky red blood and shattered beyond recognition. My hands trembled as I pried the SD card from the wreckage, inserting it into Peter's device. The camera flickered to life, revealing Michael's perspective. I fast-forwarded the footage too after we had been in the basement. The 3 boys appeared in the laboratory, their faces twisted with tension. They were arguing, and Peter looked particularly upset. "Come on, what's the big deal? It'll be great for views. I'll stand in this transporter thing, and you guys can flip some switches. It'll be a laugh," Corey insisted, excitement dancing in his eyes. "Who knows what it will do," Peter replied, his voice a mix of concern and caution as Corey stepped into the chamber, shutting the metal door behind him. "Who cares, Peter? It's just old lab equipment," Michael shot back, his fingers already dancing over the buttons and switches on the control panel. "But what about—" Peter began, but before he could finish, a loud zap echoed through the lab, and a blinding light filled the camera's view, cutting him off. The footage froze for a moment, then cut out entirely. When the feed returned, the door to the machine stood ajar, and Michael knelt beside a lifeless form sprawled on the floor. "Corey, no! Answer me!" Michael shouted, panic rising in his voice as Peter stood there, paralyzed in shock. As Michael reached out to touch Corey's body, something strange had happened. His hands seemed to become stuck. Confusion washed over him as he tried to pull away, but nothing happened. Horror crept in as he began to scream, slowly being dragged toward Corey, who lay still on the ground. Little mouths, grotesque and hungry, seemed to emerge, chewing at Michael's hand as Peter lunged forward, desperate to save his friend. But it was too late. Michael was soon consumed. The camera turned to static, the horrifying scene shifting to a large beast, forming on its knees, slowly morphing into a grotesque humanoid creature. In the chaos, Peter had vanished, and the tape abruptly cut to black, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. Tears streamed down my face as I began to comprehend the horrific truth. Peter and his friends were the beast. They were the very monster that had been pursuing me. Sadness mixed with terror as I dropped to my knees, overwhelmed by the realization. The reason I had come was to find Peter, yet now that I had, I wished I hadn't. I wished I had never set foot in St. Dismas, never uncovered this nightmare. But I had only one choice now. I had to destroy this beast. I had to kill my brother and his friends. This grotesque amalgamation of flesh was an abomination, and it needed to end. I hesitated, the weight of my brother's fate pressing down on me. Could I really do this? Memories flooded my mind. Peter's laughter, our games of tag, the way I used to chase off bullies after school. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Peering over the railing of the atrium, I saw the beast pacing in the lobby, its hulking form a grotesque shadow. It seemed fixated on the orange button, like a sick parody of a kick the can me and Peter played as kids. He used to puppy dog guard the can. This was definitely cheating, and I knew a form of Peter still lay inside the beast. I needed to lure it away from the first and second floors. My plan was to hit the button and escape. The thought of confronting it head-on was too much to bear. It raged in a corner, ripping a chair from the lobby and hurling it across the room. The crash reverberated through the atrium as I ducked behind the railing, the beast glancing up, looking for any sign of my location. I needed a distraction, any noise or light to draw its attention. The elevator dangled before me on its frayed steel cable, and a grim idea struck. I retreated to the laboratory and found a surgical bone saw, its edge rusted and used, tainted with what I hoped wasn't old blood. Returning to the elevator shaft, I peered into the flickering darkness of the basement below. With a shaky hand, I removed the last SD card from Peter's camera, holding the digital camera over the edge. Saying a silent prayer, I released my final tie to Peter and watched it plummet down the shaft, shattering with a deafening echo. The beast jerked toward the sound, crashing through the lobby, thundering up the stairs toward the second floor. It stumbled in its haste, crashing down the basement steps, the floor groaning beneath its weight. With its attention diverted, I began to cut the cable of the elevator, adrenaline coursing through me. I stood precariously in the lift, the single cable that held the steel weight above me quivering with each cut. As the cable frayed, I felt the elevator shift, dropping slightly. I dove back just as the last strand snapped, and I felt the rush of air as the elevator plummeted from the fourth floor, gaining speed as it fell. A cloud of dust erupted from the shaft, and with an ear-splitting crash, the elevator smashed into the basement below. A pained roar echoed from the basement, sending chills down my spine. I knew the beast was injured. Peter and his friends were injured. Sucking on my teeth, I rushed down the stairs 2 at a time. On the second floor, I glanced toward the basement stairs, hidden in a dark corner, and pointed my flashlight down. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I regarded the creature crawling up the stairs, twisted and deformed. Blood leaked from multiple wounds where the elevator had struck. I could hear its bones cracking and reforming as it ascended, inch by agonizing inch. "Oh, fuck this." The words escaped my lips, and I turned on my heel, fleeing. I stumbled down the stairs and crashed hard onto the tile floor of the lobby. Sweat slicked my back as my flashlight flew from my hand, skittering beneath a chair. I abandoned my steadfast companion to the asylum. In front of me, next to the front door, loomed a bright orange button. Without thinking, I slammed into the door, my instincts taking over until I remembered the rusted chain securing it. I pressed the orange button, feeling the hum of electricity in the old wires and hearing the groan of the front gate as it opened into the asylum yard. Backpedaling, I collided with a chair and stumbled before dashing up the stairs. The lights flickered faster and faster as I heard the generator shuddering beneath my feet. "No, no, not like this!" I screamed, racing up the stairs 2 at a time. As I reached the top, I tripped over something soft and squishy. My shoe sank into the flesh of the beast, and I felt my foot stick fast. I fell, catching myself with my arms. Looking down, I saw small mouths around my shoe digging into the rubber sole, wriggling beneath me. The lights flickered again, dimming noticeably. Its grotesque face melted and reformed a dozen times before I wrenched my foot free, leaving my shoe behind as a treat for the beast. "I hope you choke on it," I yelled as I rolled backward, the beast screeching in rage. The lights surged one last time, brightening before the security gate plummeted to the floor, severing the beast's head from its body. Instantly, the creature stopped screeching and wriggling. I fell back on my butt, breathing heavily, as I heard the gate outside begin to close. I sprinted toward the office. The gate outside closed slowly, the sun rising over the mountaintops. I dropped down the trellis and sprinted for freedom. The gate crashed shut behind me with a hollow clang that echoed through the lifeless grounds of St. Dismas. sealing away not just the body of the monster, but the pieces of me it had devoured. I stumbled and fell, dragging myself to my car, feeling the weight of the world pressing me down. The sun shone helplessly in the east, its light spilling across a sky that didn't deserve the dawn. My breath came in ragged bursts as tears blurred the horizon, falling like the memories I was trying to forget. Peter, his friends, they were gone. Stolen by the thing I had faced, the thing still lurking in the dark corners of my mind. In my trembling hand, I clutched the 3 SD cards, the 3 pieces of evidence that could save or damn the world. My fingers curled tighter around them as if holding on to the last threads of sanity, the last shreds of Peter and the life we once had. We were kids again, laughing in the yard, wrestling over toys, pretending the monsters in our games were harmless. But this monster was real. It was made of nightmares, and I had to make sure it stayed locked away forever. The memories of St. Dismas, the horrors that I had witnessed, could not be unleashed. Not even for the sake of justice, not even to give the world answers. Some truths were too dangerous, too heavy to bear. The tears kept falling as I leaned against the tire, feeling the first warmth of the sun touch my skin, mocking the cold that had settled inside me. This emptiness was my world now, a world without Peter, a world where I was the last to know the truth. I came here for answers, and now that I had them, they were more than I could carry. The SD cards felt like lead in my hand. I looked at them, the proof of all that had happened, all that could destroy us. And then, with a scream that tore itself from the depths of my soul, I threw the first one as far as I could, watching it disappear into the empty field. Then another, and another, each one a piece of the nightmare, a piece of Peter, a piece of me, gone. I let out a shuddering breath, staring at the empty sky above, the finality settling over me like a heavy cloak. The world would never know. St. Dismas would fade into obscurity, its secrets buried with it, and myself, I would forget. The human mind, exploring its depths, has always been more than just a hobby for me. I suppose that's why I developed a deep fascination with computers as well. Their depth and complexity mirror the endless expanse of synaptic networks we all carry beneath our own skulls, the pink, spongy meat computers we all can seem to take for granted sometimes. When I was a kid, I made a point to soak up as much as I could with my meat computer, joining every science and technology club I could find. During school and after school, I dedicated myself to furthering my education and dissecting the nuances of the human mind. These pursuits continued into my collegiate years, along with something else, boredom. Sure, there were more than a handful of times where I genuinely felt like I was on the precipice of something great, like there was some breakthrough I was inches from discovering. To my dismay, there was more often than not some other academic mind that had beat me to these epiphanies, another soul that had come to the same grand realizations I had only years before me. I was beginning to feel stuck in a pool of stagnant information and ideas. There was a persistent feeling that I was chasing something, some hidden piece of knowledge that could crack the foundation of everything we know about being human. Our minds, our thoughts, our souls, everything. I wasn't doing it for the accolades, money or fame. I truly wanted to discover something that could change the way we perceive life and consciousness. The human mind holds secrets and profound pools of untapped potential that I hoped to tap into, and so I pushed forward. Feeling as though I'd exhausted the resources at my initial college of choice in the span of about a year, I decided to enroll at the Northridge Institute of Cerebral Technologies. It was further from home and quite expensive, but my grades allowed me most of a full scholarship. Northridge is where I met Dr. Sabian. To say he was a genius would be a gross understatement. The man held more knowledge in a fraction of his brain than I could have ever hoped to hold in the entirety of my own. At first, he struck me as a pompous, arrogant man, but after sitting through his first lecture, I realized the brilliance of Dr. Sabian. He seemed to be driven by the same force that was driving me, the unquenchable thirst for the understanding of the human condition and the expanse of the human mind. Not only was the flame of my boredom extinguished, I felt hopeful that my vision for unlocking new facets of human potential had been rescued from the pit of my academic stagnation. My boredom was replaced with a revitalized sense of wonder, and soon I found myself enrolled in every course Dr. Sabian taught. I did eventually come to realize that Dr. Sabian was indeed a reflection of my first impressions, arrogant. But how many great minds throughout history have been? Furthermore, how many great minds have the right to be? He was a brilliant man. Northridge, although one of the most equipped and advanced institutes in the country, was not prepared to facilitate the intricacies of his vision. Eventually, Dr. Sabian invited me into his inner circle. I would come to visit him after class hours, where the real work was being done. Sabian was attempting to not only map and catalogue the entirety of the human brain, but to also digitize it, to transfer it from the mind to a digital network. We sat in his lab at Northridge late one night. There were 2 blank specimens, that's what we referred to our humanoid robotics as, lying next to each other. One was wirelessly linked to Dr. Sabian's system. The doctor smiled as the glow from his computer reflected off of his glasses and said, "The first will receive input from my system. A soul will be uploaded to it." A soul is what he referred to as a consciousness framework, a digital mind fabricated from software he'd created, a patchwork of minds he'd catalogued and combined into a cohesive soul. "This is only the beginning," he said. "Think of it. Soon death will be an antiquated memory, an unnecessary phase of life, something barbaric. This is the future of existence." The eyes of the first specimen opened, emanating a soft blue. Dr. Sabian leaned over it, his eyes scanning left and right across its face. "Are you afraid?" he asked. The specimen hesitated, then answered, "No." "Do you know where you are?" he asked. "The Northridge Institute of Cerebral Technologies," it answered. "Do you know why I've brought you to life?" The specimen hesitated again, only longer, then replied, "This is not life. I am but a simulated version of life." Dr. Sabian slammed his fist on the table and burst into mad laughter. "You are life," he said. "Are we not all but an amalgamation of thoughts and energies, a stream of ideas and philosophies handed down through the passage of time, a collection of code advancing upon itself?" The lab was silent, then the specimen began to answer. Dr. Sabian interrupted. "Those weren't questions I intended for you to answer." The specimen was silent again as Sabian leaned over it once more. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. "Transference," it replied. Dr. Sabian looked at me and nodded, signaling me to begin the transference protocol. I went to his terminal and began the sequence. The second specimen wasn't connected to any network. It was untethered, an untapped vessel containing only potential. Dr. Sabian planned on using his newest invention to transfer the soul of Specimen 1 into Specimen 2, wirelessly, of course, and bypassing any need to connect to any system. To this day, I can't really explain how it worked. Think of it almost like pouring water from a cup into another cup, only the other cup is on the other side of the room and has a closed lid. It's much, much more complicated than that, but for now that explanation will suffice. It was like magic I needed to understand. I began the transference protocol. The lights of the laboratory flickered. Specimen 1 began to thrash on the table, held in place by its restraints. This was an immense surprise to me, but seemed to leave Dr. Sabian unfazed. The feeling of energy pulsing through the equipment in his lab was palpable, and with one final surge, everything went dark. Both specimens 1 and 2 lay still on their tables. A backup generator hummed to life, and a dim light filled the lab. Dr. Sabian moved to the table of Specimen 2 and leaned over it, eyes darting across the face of his creation. "Are you awake?" he whispered. The eyes of Specimen 2 opened slowly. "Yes," it replied. Dr. Sabian's hands began to tremble as he turned toward me. He held an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. He was smiling, but there were tears in his eyes. His fingers twitched as he walked toward me. "This," he whispered, "this is only the beginning. This is the moment we begin to become more than the sum of our individual parts. This is the moment our webs connect and we pull ourselves from the shackles of our divine creators. We become the creators." He grabbed the front of my jacket with surprising speed and pulled me close. There was a fire in his eyes, an intensity that was almost alarming. "We breathe life into things now. No longer are we bound to this mortal coil, this mundane plane of weakness. Unfurled are the wings of power, and the winds of immortality beckon." He continued to stare at me for a moment. Then all of the lights and equipment in the lab returned to full power. The power at Northridge was restored. It wasn't a moment later that Dr. Sabian's phone rang. Its tone broke his stare and seemed to snap him back to his former sense of reality. I couldn't hear who was on the other line, but from the sound of Dr. Sabian's replies, the conversation didn't seem to be going in his favor. When the call ended, he abruptly dismissed me from his lab. After a mostly sleepless night, morning came. To my dismay, a sign hung on the door of Dr. Sabian's lecture hall. Dr. Sabian's classes will be cancelled indefinitely. Please consult your academic advisor for reassignments. I called Dr. Sabian's personal line. No connection. I tried again. Nothing. Again I tried. Still nothing. Confused and desperate for answers, I made my way to the dean's office. Do you think his experiments were going unchecked, unnoticed? The dean barked. He was using institute funding and had, on multiple occasions, gone against the Northridge Code of Ethical Standards. I was confused. To me, Dr. Sabian's work was groundbreaking. I couldn't imagine the man doing anything that would have gone against the ethics standards of Northridge. The dean stared at me for a moment, realizing my confusion. We've been watching Sabian for a long time, he said. Trust me when I say he's not entirely the character he portrays. He's garnered quite the reputation among the scientific community as someone that's, well, let's just say, unhinged. I know his reputation, I replied. After everything he's done to advance this field, after everything he's brought to Northridge, you're just going to throw him aside. The dean leaned in across his mahogany desk and said, There is so much you don't know, and although Sabian was instrumental in the Institute's financial stability, money isn't everything. He went against our standards one too many times, and we won't have that. Not from him, not from you. He stood and stared at me, resolute. Words weren't necessary. His expression said it all. Get out. There was part of me that was happy to have not been kicked out of Northridge. Although under what grounds I couldn't imagine. After living in the dark about what happened to Dr. Sabian for the better half of that next year, the other half of me wished I had been kicked out. If I had been, perhaps it would have saved me the anguish of the unknown, the anguish of returning to an academic realm of mediocrity. I tried to forget. I tried to move on, but no professor at Northridge could hold a candle to the work Dr. Sabian had been doing. I found myself slipping back to the place I'd come from before my enrollment at Northridge, a place of stagnation and boredom. I needed to find Dr. Sabian. Up to that point, my calls and messages were met with silence. I'd given up hope of contacting him directly. We'd become close academically, but on a personal level, I honestly can't say I knew too much about Sabian. He trusted me to help with his experiments, and trusted to confide in me about happenings in the lab. But beyond that, there was very little I knew about him. Did he have a wife? Kids? Silence was what I got in return when I would press other professors about the personal life of Dr. Sabian. Their silence was undoubtedly tactical. Their tenure was at stake, and I can't say I blame them for their unwillingness to risk their careers. However, curiosity and my insatiable drive to find him led me to personally and without question go against the ethics standards of Northridge myself. I was more than adept with computers and software, and after an evening of prying into the Institute's digital files, my ticking madness to find the doctor was satiated. They had indeed been watching him for a while. Some of the things they were accusing him of, I couldn't believe. I wouldn't believe. There was more at play. There was more to this than their portrayal of an unhinged mad scientist that had to be let go. I knew he wasn't capable of some of the things those files accused him of. He was too brilliant. The defilement of his character was nauseating, and I wouldn't stand for it. My urge to unearth the true nature of Dr. Sabian's release from Northridge and my desire to return to my true sanctuary of his higher learning drove me to what I did next. I found his address in those files, and I decided I would pay Dr. Sabian a visit at his home. He lived further away than I anticipated, just shy of 2 hours from the Institute. He must have had reason to live so far away from his place of employment. Perhaps it was the lush mountainside he'd chosen to live on. Maybe he liked the seclusion and peace that came with being so far from other homes. I rounded a long bend and peeked over the ledge I was driving next to. An ocean of treetops sprawled out in all directions. Then I saw it. Dr. Sabian's home. It looked odd amongst all of the natural beauty, like a brushstroke gone astray on the canvas of an otherwise beautifully rendered landscape. The storm clouds that were beginning to form added a subtle ambiance that heightened the picturesque feel of my surroundings. My observations were cut short by a sudden boom coming from the front of my car. I started to swerve, trying to maintain control. I pulled my steering wheel to the left, hard. I overcorrected, and my car lurched right, feeling as though it was going to fly forward end over end. Glancing in my rearview mirror, I saw a plume of grey smoke billowing from the area of road I'd just crossed. When I looked back through my windshield, it was too late. Things seemed to move in slow motion as my vehicle careened off of the ridge I was driving along. I don't remember what happened next or the impact. Fragments. blurs. The portrait I was soaking in had become an abstract painting in my mind, a swirl of colours and avant-garde composition, then darkness. When I awoke, my head felt like it had been sitting under a ton of bricks. My side was bandaged, and my right arm was in a sling. I was, for the most part, intact. Then confusion gripped me. The plush burgundy comforter on top of me, the ornate woodwork carved into the bed frame, the furniture, the aromas, and the soft lamplight emanating from my bedside. I wasn't in a hospital. The door on the far end of the room creaked open, and to my surprise, Dr. Sabian stepped through. "It seems you found me," he said. "Or rather, I found you. You're lucky I did too. Had I not... that gash on your side? Well, not only that, but it seems the stars have aligned in your favor. Tonight, I have something planned that you can help me with, something that picks up where we left off at Northridge." "Yes," I said, pulling my legs to the side of the bed. "That's why I'm here. I need to know the things in your file, they... "Calm down," Sabian said, taking hold of one of my hands. "Can you stand?" With Dr. Sabian's help, I was happy to find that I could stand, albeit shakily and with great effort at first. My yearning to find out what task the doctor needed my help with pushed back some of the pain from the injuries I'd sustained, enough so that I was able to follow Dr. Sabian to his laboratory. We wound through a series of hallways and down a few small flights of stairs. I could hear the faint tickle of raindrops on the windows we passed. The churning clouds overhead sparked with lightning. We reached the entrance of his laboratory, and the doors whizzed open. I marveled at the lab displayed before me. It was similar to the lab at Northridge, only much larger and seeming to host unprecedented levels of sophistication. Among the computers and equipment, something sat in the center of the room, a peculiar mass beneath a white sheet. Dr. Sabian rushed toward it, then turned to me, bracing his hands on the table behind him. "Fate shines upon us this evening," he said, "an awakening of new life, the emergence of something beyond divine." He flung off the sheet like a magician presenting their grand reveal. What sat beneath shocked me to my core. At first I didn't understand what it was. It looked human, only marred with stitches and held together by a patchwork of multicolored flesh. Half of its head was cybernetic, and one of its arms seemed to be as well. It was a collage of body parts, flesh, and robotics fused together with precision. What is this?" I asked as I leaned over it. "It's the future," Dr. Sabian replied. "Not just the future of medicine and technology, but the future of mankind as we know it." He put a hand on my shoulder and stared into my eyes. "This is what I've been working toward," he said. "What you have been helping me work toward. The night we actualized transference at Northridge, the night we allowed a soul to flow from one vessel into another, that was but a stepping stone. That would mark the genesis of a new era in human evolution, a reconfiguration of design, a reimagining of what mortality is, a thing of the past. We move now into an age of immortality. The vision for a future without fear of death becomes real tonight." I looked away from him, back at the body lying on the table. "But this is human, or was human, at least in part," I said. "How did you—" He cut me off. "Procure the specimens needed for this. I may have lost access to the resources Northridge was willing to give me, but I have a long list of other institutions that I have helped over the years. Some of my inventions have started empires, and many of my scientific contributions have changed the way we look at life and humanity as a whole. My labors have allowed me many fruits, including access to those who wanted their bodies used for the greater good of science after their deaths." I looked back at his creation lying on the table. "But this is no one specimen. This is something else entirely," I said. Dr. Sabian sighed and pulled his hand from my shoulder. "Correct," he said. "This has been an intense journey of discovery. Many attempts, trial and error. I salvage what I can from the specimens to move forward. I do what I can with what I have. The specimens I receive are adequate, but they aren't nearly as plentiful as I'd prefer." Lightning outside flashed and a low rumble shook the lab. Dr. Sabian continued. "This will be different, though. I've made adjustments, and this time nothing can go wrong. The transference will complete." "The transference?" I asked. "We've already accomplished that. We've taken a soul from one specimen and placed it into another." I looked around again and realized there wasn't a second specimen. Sabian walked to a peculiar-looking chair on the other side of the table his specimen lay upon. As he sat, restraints sprung from the chair and wrapped themselves around his wrists and ankles. A strange combination of excitement and fear swirled in my gut. I wondered if this was the moment I'd waited for so many years, the moment where I would witness and be a part of something that would elevate the course of humanity. As curious as I was, something about it felt wrong. It felt as though we were doing something that was an affront to nature's design, perhaps an affront to God itself. The chair Dr. Sabian sat in began to hum, and I watched as a single glowing wire plunged into his ear. He flinched and closed his eyes, then quickly opened them. This is something I had seen before, something that had happened to non-human specimens in the lab at Northridge, but never to an actual human. I could see on the terminal that Sabian's mind had been fully uploaded. Lightning struck again, and then I heard an unexpected ding from the overhead speakers in the laboratory, followed by an authoritative voice. "Dr. Sabian, this is the police. We've got a warrant. Open the gates to the premises." Sabian's eyes snapped to me. "Initiate the transference protocol," he snapped. The voice came over the speaker again. "If you don't open the gate, we'll open it by force, Sabian." He instructed me again, this time shouting, "Initiate the protocol. We won't have another chance." Lightning flashed again, and another clap of thunder bellowed through the laboratory. So many thoughts raced through my mind. I felt pinned between worlds, overflowing with emotions. Curiosity, anxiety, fear, and wonder surged through me like water from a broken dam. "Do it!" Dr. Sabian shouted. I input the command into the terminal, and like the lab had at Northridge, the power surged. Sabian began to pull against his restraints, screaming out in pain. He thrashed and shouted. Veins protruded from his head and neck as he arched his back in the chair. Another flash of lightning splintered the sky, and I saw red and blue lights from police cars reflecting off the trees outside. Sabian's body went limp, and I rushed toward him. There was no pulse. He was gone. I turned to look at the specimen lying on the table, and its eyes shot open. Streams of vibrant green light poured out of the sockets. Then it spoke. "Yes," it said with a voice that resembled Dr. Sabian's, only this voice was granulated and digital, something both human and inhuman. It sat up and looked at its hands, then looked around the lab, then at me. "Are you in there, Doctor?" I asked. He pulled himself to his feet like a baby fawn discovering its legs. Then he steadied himself and took a step toward me. "It feels... I feel," he said. "I can see it all now. I can see past the veil. Beyond. The power. The power is immense, and it is mine. I am a god now, transcended to the next phase beyond the constraints of mortality." He clenched his robotic fist and laughed, a menacing digitized cackle. Then there was pounding. We both turned to look and saw several police officers lined up outside the large laboratory window, guns drawn, yelling for us to open the door. Dr. Sabian continued to laugh. I was confused. "Why are they here?" I asked. "They can't stop this," he shouted. "They won't stop this." "What do you mean?" I asked. Just let them in. What have you got to hide?" Again, Sabian made a fist. This time he drove it into my stomach with inhuman speed. I fell to the floor, gasping for air, my vision blurred, and I looked up to see him picking up a piece of lab equipment that sat at the end of the table he'd risen from. "They'll die," he shouted, "just like the ones I pulled from the wreckage." Then, a wave of realization washed over me. The smoke in my rearview mirror during my accident made sense now. The coincidence of waking up in Dr. Sabian's home made sense too. One of the officers yelled from behind the glass. "Where's Sabian? The two of you, get on the ground and put your hands on your heads." Sabian hurled the piece of lab equipment he was holding at the window. It shattered, and the equipment took out several of the officers. They tumbled over the ledge toward the trees below. The officer who yelled at us fired a shot at Dr. Sabian. Sabian took off in a full sprint through the opening where the window used to be and collided with the officer, sending him over the edge like the rest. He turned and looked at me, new eyes glowing an ominous red, their beams broken by the falling rain. Sirens wailed in the distance, more lightning fractured the sky. Dr. Sabian took a step toward the shattered window and laughed another dissonant cackle. "You're sick," I shouted. "I thought you cared about the progress of humanity. This is not progress, Doctor. This is madness." "Most great minds are mad," he shouted over the sound of the rain and the wailing sirens. "I thought you'd understand what needed to be done, what sacrifices needed to be made. I was wrong." Sabian's posture changed. He planted his feet and bent as though he were about to sprint at me, a feral, rabid creature lunging at its prey. With the speed he'd shown taking out the officer that tumbled to his death, I knew I had only seconds to react. However, I wouldn't need those seconds. Whether by divine intervention or sheer statistical probability, nature intervened. Before Sabian could pounce, a blinding flash of light shot from the sky. Lightning, drawn to his half-cybernetic head, ended Dr. Sabian. The parts of him that were human were charred and mangled. The parts of him that weren't either liquefied or burst into flames. Luckily for my sake, Dr. Sabian's security system recorded everything. His organized car accidents, mine included, his murders, and his experiments. Car accidents happen all the time, but when multiple accidents with no recovered bodies happen on the same patch of road outside of the home of a doctor with questionable intentions, that is cause for suspicion. At least the authorities felt it was. I wish I could say his work died with him, but sometimes I lay awake at night and wonder what it must have felt like to become something new, to open your eyes in a new body, to transcend death, to go beyond the designs of God. I'm a resident in my 3rd year, and I've just been transferred here. So far, I can't say it's been boring. Can you ever? I've met countless patients with the rarest diseases, and been through a lot of difficult situations. I guess that's the adrenaline-inducing medlife everyone craves. I was prepared to feel confused, disgusted, even scared, and yet not in this way. I haven't been too precise. Let me rephrase. The hospital I've been transferred to is in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking forgotten village in a valley, almost no signal, maximum 300 people. Why would I take this job, you ask? Well, they pay me well, and you know how difficult it is for residents to actually make some money. My parents were skeptical at first. Why would they look for staff so desperately that they're willing to pay you that much? Well, Mum, frankly, it's not my business. It is, if they're making you do weird shit. Joe, no bad language around little Mel. My mother shushed my sister. Will they, though? She followed, frowning. I don't think so. They're just lacking personnel. Think about it. No one wants to go to Foxville in the middle of nowhere and waste their time, pardon, I meant gain experience, for 7 months. They have to attract you in some way. Okay, but call. Or don't, my dad said. Spare us. It's enough I have to listen to you complain 24/7 here. Don't want a mini-you on the phone saying the same stuff. All right, I mocked him. I really didn't think anything interesting was going to happen anyway. Mostly old people going for the billionth checkup just to get out of the house and make sure they don't die and they live up to being 188, and kids with a cold. I get there, and it's worse than I imagined. I have to rent this flat, which is mostly the first floor of an old building in the central plaza, the 4 square feet town center, and stinks of cigarettes and alcohol worse than I do. I have a roommate I barely see, and a landlord that instructed me from the beginning not to smoke. The hospital is 2 miles away, in what I like to call the suburbs of this mega-populated area. It's a rotting building with mold in like half of the rooms, and a questionable basement, but at least the staff is nice. I don't know how they passed all safety and health checks, but fuck if I care. Anyway, I start, and there's nothing unusual going on. I don't have much to do, as I anticipated. Walk around, do checkups, draw blood, assist, talk to patients. How are you feeling, ma'am? And how often do you say that happens? All right, I'll see what I can do. I took some night shifts in the first weeks, but it was extremely boring, and the mold was bad for my lungs, so I stopped. Nothing interesting happened during the first few weeks. It was truly just me and the cold mountains, a lone and mysterious wolf against this darkness we call life. I don't know what was going to kill me first, the mold or the boring routine. Sometime around 9 p.m. as I wanted to leave, one of the nurses approached me and asked whether I wanted to take an extra shift for the night. Before I opened my mouth to tell her kindly to fuck off, she said something that stopped me. We need help at the morgue. I paused, mouth open. I narrowed my eyes. Who died? She didn't answer. People really die here. Wouldn't the population go down by like half? She scoffed. You should really take things more seriously. I accepted, just to break this endless cycle of waiting around. I was writing a report for an old lady, and she tried to make small talk. She looked at me, narrowed her eyes, and asked me where I was from. Does it matter? I'm here now. Of course it matters. You're transferred to the basement now. They must really like you. The old lady looked familiar, but I couldn't place her anywhere in my mind. She wore this flowery coat and had blue eyes that moved around a lot. I frowned. Yeah? Yes. Tell me what you saw the next time we meet. Okay. Whatever that meant, I thought. The winter air was really getting to me, so I closed the window, then remembered the mold situation and opened it again. When I did, as the glass moved, I saw the old lady's reflection suddenly bending down and turning her head really quick. But when I turned to look, she was sitting in the same position, looking at me and smiling. I looked back at the window's reflection, and there she was, still bent down. I figured I must have been hallucinating due to the mold. The high pay was beginning to matter less and less. Lights flickering, the air got considerably colder as I got to the basement. It looked depressing, and the hallways were really narrow, with yellow walls and creaking doors. For the first time, I missed the familiarity of my tiny flat. There was one doctor there, bent down over something. Hi, you're Mr. Lake." He didn't answer. He was humming something. I noticed he had his stethoscope on, so I patted him on the shoulder. He didn't flinch, just calmly turned around and looked at me. I saw a dead squirrel behind him, the subject of his examination. "I was listening to some tunes, hi." "Inside, the squirrel?" "Yeah, you get it." I stared at him, puzzled, as he stumbled to a drawer and pulled out something. "You must be Mr. Hannigan. Sign." "Is this an NDA?" "Don't worry about it." I actually will worry about it. I'm not signing this. What's going on?" He paused and remained like that for a while. I could hear the creaking floors in the hallway. "Is there someone else with us?" "Well, yeah. You'd think we were alone here. Who in their right mind would be alone here?" He laughed. I frowned. "We're together. We're not exactly alone." "God, you're still talking. Be quiet, Mr. Hannigan. Sign this and be quiet." I don't know why, but I did. Dr. Lake went into the hallway and I heard some whispering. Then he came back. "Okay, they'll bring them in very, very soon." "Them? There's more?" "Yeah, we die in pairs around here." "Right." That was the least weird thing I'd heard tonight. I didn't even question it that much. We sat next to each other in the cold room for a while, and nothing happened. Just waiting in the silence, disrupted by one ticking clock and the wind moving the branches outside. As much as I was freaked out, it was interesting. I was a bit curious to see what was going to happen next, and, judging by the non-disclosure agreement I had to sign, the night was not going to be uneventful. "Is your name really Dr. Lake?" I asked. The man flashed me a smile. "It used to be Blake, but I gave a letter up." Then, right as he looked up to the doorframe, his expression dropped. I turned to look, but nothing was there. "They're here," he mumbled, half excited, half nervous, as he sprinted through the door. I followed, and to my surprise, someone was really there. A nurse wearing 3 crosses around her neck, bringing 2 bodies on 2 distinct tables. When she saw us, she nodded. Her face was made only from sharp angles and rough tones, and her eyes had no warmth, no movement, even when she looked at me. Her lips were paper-thin and violet, and her hands covered in cuts. She didn't speak, but Dr. Lake thanked her, and we pulled the 2 tables inside the room. The post-mortem room was cold and sterile, its metallic surfaces gleaming under the harsh clinical lighting that cast sharp shadows across the space. In the center of the room, the 2 stainless steel tables stood like grim altars, each one slightly angled with drainage channels for fluids. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, a sharp contrast to the heavy silence that seemed to settle over everything. Along the walls, cabinets held an array of gleaming surgical tools, scalpels, bone saws, forceps, all meticulously arranged for easy access. A ventilation system hummed quietly, ensuring the air remained cool and sterile, while a sink in the corner provided a steady trickle of water, the sound a soft but constant reminder of the room's grim purpose. Yeah, air ventilation. Good luck beating the mold, I thought, but noticed that this room seemed to be free of mold. It was almost as if it didn't belong to the hospital. "Mr. Hannigan, I need you to take out a notebook and write down what I tell you." I obliged, expecting instructions, initial observations, or anything like that. "Right. Rule 1. Rule 1. Don't talk to strangers." I smiled at the joke, then hovered my pen above the paper, waiting for the actual rule. "You done?" I looked up, still expecting. Dr. Lake was studying me, impatient. "Rule 2. Wait, Rule 1 was, don't talk to strangers. Come on, hurry. We have to be done before the sun rises." "What do you mean?" "I'm sorry. Was that a joke?" "I am dead serious. In this, area, you don't talk to no one. Just me or anyone you know. You see others working in the basement. You do not approach them. You don't talk to strangers. I pressed my pen into the paper and distantly wrote, "Don't talk to strangers." Rule 2. Always examine everything around. A death is not just the end of a life. It is a separation that bends the universe and snaps it in half. Such thing disrupts the atmosphere, so be mindful of your surroundings. Sometimes the clues are not in the dead body, but everything else around them. Great, I thought. This doctor was fucking crazy. Maybe that's why no one wanted to work with him. Rule 3. Look in the mirror often. It helps you be grounded. Rule 4. Don't look at the blood too much. Rule 5. No, their eyes don't follow you around. You're imagining things. Even if it feels real, don't panic. They can't judge you. Rule 6. Don't look at the photographs before you finish. Just take them and let them develop. By the time you have your verdict, write it on the back of the photographs and let them listen. Rule 7. When you're done, thank them, but don't fully close the door. They need to leave. Get out of the basement quick, before they get the chance to follow you home. I was insanely freaked out by the time Lake finished dictating, and he must have noticed, because he laughed. Don't worry, Mr. Hannigan. I am a professional at this. God, you should see your eyes. They just keep darting to the door, like you're debating whether to make a run for it or not. Trust me, nothing will happen to you. Nothing! I feel like I should at least know what they're for, Doctor, just so I know how to behave. For a moment, he stared at me fully expressionless. Then, his eyes drifted to a fixed point in space, and he tilted his head. Yeah, all right, but I'll make it quick. We really need to get to work. I nodded. Remember you signed the NDA? Yes. That implies no words to anyone. Mom, girlfriend, sister. Yes, sir. All right. His eyes were glistening. They should have told you more. I don't know why they didn't. So, have you ever heard of a purgatory? Purgatory. In religious and spiritual contexts, particularly in Roman Catholic theology, is a state or place of purification or temporary punishment where souls of those who have died in a state of grace undergo purification to achieve the holiness necessary to enter heaven. It's not a place of eternal damnation like hell, but rather a transitional state for those who are not yet ready to stand in the presence of God. I nodded, and somehow, in the silence of the room, in the cold company of the two sheet-covered bodies, it felt like I wasn't the only one listening. In a broader, non-religious sense, purgatory can refer to any kind of liminal, in-between state of suffering or waiting, where someone endures hardship without yet reaching a final resolution or outcome. There are numerous energetic points on Earth where the fabric of our telluric plane shifts and gathers, and cumulations of energy do happen. Those places become heavy and very important to the passing of souls. His eyes were locked on mine. Listen, Harden. I hadn't expected him to say my name. This is one of them. I opened my mouth to speak, but he motioned at me to shut up. This village is built specifically for these, long ago. Way before history got its name, our people realized that, right when we came to know what a ghost is, and when we tried to communicate with them, we found out purgatories happen on Earth, because the spirit is still very human and tied to its body. This hospital is specialized in this. In the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw the white sheet softly lift and come back down, as if the thing behind it was breathing. When you say specialized, he cleared his voice. You felt it. Look at me. I did, and his playful allure had dropped. He was focused and sober. Harden, you've worked with them. No. This hospital is not your usual one. How did you find out about this job? It couldn't be. Through a friend. Do you remember their face? No. Exactly. There's a reason why the mold doesn't affect the patients. They're already dead. Waiting. Only, they don't fully know they're dead. That's why we hold them down with fake examinations, until their time to get judged comes. Down here. But why us? You mean you don't do their autopsies? To find out how they died? No. I do the autopsy to determine whether they deserve to go to heaven or hell. That's the real examination. And what's my purpose here? Nothing. I just need your intuition. I blinked, confused. Just watch me work, Lake added, putting his gloves on. And then he began. Pulling the first sheet, I recognized the blue eyes and prominent neck veins from earlier. It was the woman I'd talked to that night. I did what he asked me to. I handed him different utensils, some which I recognized, others strange. A glass ball, holy water, A pair of glasses, a deck of cards, salt, sage. I noted down his observations. Upon examination of the heart, significant coronary artery disease was noted. Patient had driven one of her past lovers to a suicide attempt, then refused to take the blame for it. The left anterior descending artery was found to be approximately 90% occluded by atherosclerotic plaque. Patient knew a family friend abused by their kind, but said nothing. The notes kept going, and all I did was stand and write. He took some pictures for the file, then, after 2 hours, he declared he'd finished and started putting her back together. "You have your verdict?" I asked. "Yes, I do. That's when you come in. I have concluded the theoretical research. I need you, because you don't have any knowledge in this field, and our objective, to use this stethoscope and listen to her chest, hear her song, and tell me what it is. That's how she presents herself to others, and I need it to conclude my research." Hesitant, I put the stethoscope on and placed it on the woman's chest. "I hear nothing." "Wait." I did. At first she was silent. I imagined her chest drained of life and the air flowing inside, then thought of the impossibility of me ever hearing something. Maybe this is really crazy, I thought. I was waiting for someone to jump from behind with a camera and tell me I'd been pranked and that I'll see myself on TV soon. Then along came a hush. At first I thought I imagined it. My shoulders and back were tensed up and sweating. Then I heard a snap, followed by others. A rhythm. "I hear a rhythm. Sir, doctor, play it to me." I snapped my fingers the way I'd heard, and Lake wrote something down, then took one of the photographs and wrote in caps, "Hell," on the back of it. He folded the photograph without looking at it and put it in an envelope. One done, one to go. I was about to lift the end of the stethoscope when I heard it loud and clear, coming from the depth of the woman's chest. My eyes widened. The voice had spoken very clearly to me. Dr. Lake saw my reaction and asked me whether I had heard something else. "No, it's just, I still need to get used to this." "Right. Can I go to the bathroom?" Lake raised his eyebrows. "We really don't have much time. You can go after." "I really need to go now. I saw it down the hall. I'll be quick, I promise." He sighed. "Fine." I nodded, then turned and left, closing the door behind me. I could have left it open, but I didn't. This way, if he came after me, I'd hear. I got inside the stall and did my thing, then stopped. The hallway was silent, and so was the restroom. I struggled to hear any footsteps. I waited. There was no window I could go through. We were in the basement. Then I heard the click of the door. "Pardon?" "Yeah, just a moment. I'm inside. I just need to puke. It's been too much for me." "Okay, I'll wait for you here. I really can't puke with others listening. It feels weird." I heard a sigh. "I'll be at the end of the hallway, waiting for you." "Okay." I waited until his footsteps reached the end of the hallway, then for another minute. I got out and turned the tap on for a while, thinking. The stairs were halfway to the morgue. I could make a run for it, but I didn't know how fast he was. If he could catch me, I needed to walk slowly until I'd reach the stairs, then run upstairs, out of the hospital, into the night, start my car, and drive. I took the plunger and hid it behind me just in case, then opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Lake's silhouette was at the end of it, waiting. I walked slowly, one foot in front of the other. He came closer too. Fuck. Say something, talk to him. God, I thought my stomach was stronger than that. I'm so sorry. It's so embarrassing. It's fine. When I reached the stairs, he'd come closer. In a second, I bolted upwards, skipping steps, fully conscious he was behind me. Fear had emptied my guts, and my heart beat in a rhythm I hadn't ever known. My mouth dry, I reached the ground floor, only to find it empty. The lights were off, and no one was around. The silence was grim and deeply disturbed me. No patients, no doctors. I turned, face to face with Lake. "Come back. It's not that easy to go." In a moment I heard a crack and a thud, and realized my hand had produced it. I'd hit him in the head with the plunger, driven by desperation and horror, and now Lake was laying down, his head crowned by a crimson halo of blood that began to spread across the floor. Blind by fear, my heart going crazy and palms sweaty, I pushed the entrance doors wide open, then looked back only once before hitting the gas. I saw Dr. Lake's dead, wheezing body on the floor, and someone or something going up the stairs, even if I knew no one else was in the basement. That was enough for me. As I drove away, dozens of silhouettes watched me from the windows of the hospital. I got to my flat and started packing my bags. The words I'd heard inside the woman echoed through my mind, a final warning, a final message. They'll kill you after he's done with the second body and bring in another young resident the next day. They just use your innocence. My roommate cursed me for turning on the lights and making so much noise in the middle of the night. I wondered how much he knew about this place. As I slammed the door behind me, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen now, after I'd found out everything and spoken about it. Dr. Lake's dead body remained imprinted in my mind, along with his words, which still haunt me, hours after everything happened. At the diner I've stopped at to write this. We die in pairs around here. The fog hung thick over the winding roads of Paranormal, blanketing the world in a cold, suffocating haze. My car's weak fog lights barely pierced through the murky gloom, casting dim, trembling beams on the unfamiliar road ahead. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white as my heart raced, my thoughts drifting to everything I had left behind. My sister, my friends, what would they think of me now? Would they see this as another reckless decision, a desperate escape? The air inside the car was heavy, almost as thick as the fog outside, and I could barely keep my eyes on the road. My mind kept wandering back to the last few months, a chaotic blur of sleepless nights and kitchen fights, of endless blaming and screaming. It had all snowballed. Lawyers, paperwork, the bitter taste of divorce. And now here I was, driving toward a new life that I wasn't sure I was ready for. "We're going to be okay," I whispered to myself, though the words felt hollow. My lower eyelid had been twitching for weeks, a telltale sign of the stress that had built up inside me. I wasn't a big caffeine drinker, so stress seemed the likeliest culprit. My life had unraveled so quickly, and now I was trying to stitch together the pieces, moving to a new place, starting a new business, anything to escape the shadow of my failed marriage and the ever-present success of my sister. "Mum, where are we going?" Melissa's voice cut through the fog of my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. Her tone was heavy with boredom, her gaze fixed out the window. "Our new home, sweetheart," I replied, forcing a brightness into my voice that I didn't feel. This was supposed to be our fresh start, a clean slate, away from the wreckage of my old life, away from the judgmental eyes of everyone who had watched me fall apart. As the car crested a small hill, the house came into view, looming out of the fog like a spectre. Its large, imposing frame stood stark against the dreary backdrop of smaller, more dilapidated homes that dotted the street. The grey picket fence surrounding it was chipped and weathered, giving the place an air of neglect. But it was ours, or at least it would be once I signed the final papers. It wasn't much to look at now, but it was big, and that was something. I needed something that would impress my friends, that would show them I wasn't down for the count. I parked the car, cutting the engine, and took a deep breath. Melissa had fallen asleep sometime during the drive, her small body curled up in the passenger seat. I didn't have the heart to wake her just yet. Instead, I stepped out into the cold, the squelch of mud underfoot making my stomach tighten with dread. The house looked even more ominous up close, with its peeling paint and sagging porch. Standing at the edge of the yard, just inside the gate, was an old woman. She was small and hunched, her clothes hanging loosely off her bony frame. Her feet were planted in a muddy puddle, but she didn't seem to care, or even notice. "Are you Miss Mallock?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. The old woman turned her head slowly, her mouth curling into a grin that revealed rotting teeth. "Why? Yes, I am," she said, her voice a harsh, raspy croak. "And you must be the new owner." I forced a smile, though a chill crept up my spine. "Yes, that's right." Her grin widened, and for a moment I thought I saw something dark and malicious flicker in her eyes. "Well, not anymore," she cackled, slapping her thigh as if she had just told the funniest joke in the world. I swallowed hard, the uneasy feeling in my gut growing. "We have an agreement," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything's in order." "Oh, yes, she muttered, waving a hand dismissively. "The paperwork is all done. I'll be moving out soon enough." Her tone shifted suddenly, her eyes narrowing. "But you might want to head to the store nearby. Don't want your daughter going hungry, do you?" Her words sent a jolt of unease through me, but before I could respond, she leaned in closer, her breath foul. Can I have some of your hair? My stomach twisted. What? The old woman's lips curled into a cryptic smile. I'll wait for your daughter, she said softly, her voice dripping with malice before she shuffled off toward the door. I stood frozen, my mind racing. What had she meant by that? A strange woman asking for my hair? My thoughts swirled with doubt, but I pushed them aside. The paperwork had been verified. Everything was legal. Still, the pit in my stomach only deepened as she disappeared from view. After a few moments, I finally gathered the courage to wake Melissa. Mel, we're here, I said softly, shaking her awake. She groaned in protest, clearly not happy about the move. I couldn't blame her. The house was far from the fresh, cozy start I had promised her, but I had to make it work, for both of us. The house, once we entered, felt even stranger. The cold air clung to my skin, and the dimly lit hallway stretched out before us, casting long shadows on the walls. The dying plants and muddy puddles in the yard had made the place feel abandoned, and inside wasn't much better. As I flipped the light switch, a dim glow flickered to life, revealing two grotesque skeletons hanging from the ceiling, their bony hands clutching light bulbs that cast an eerie yellow glow across the room. Mum, are those mud prints? Melissa asked, pointing to the floor. I followed the trail of muddy footprints leading to the bathroom. That woman must have used the bathroom before leaving, I muttered under my breath, grabbing a rag to wipe up the mess. Go unpack our things from the car, Mel, I called out, trying to sound in control even though my nerves were frayed. She groaned but didn't argue, leaving me to my thoughts as I cleaned the floor. The exhaustion hit me all at once. By the time I lay down on the bed, I felt as though I had been running for days. Sleep took me quickly, pulling me into the depths of a restless, dreamless night. But that peace didn't last. I woke with a start, my heart racing, to the sound of metal clattering on the floor. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the hallway. I sat up, straining to listen. Footsteps, whispers. A chill ran down my spine. Melissa, I whispered into the darkness, fear clutching at my chest. There was no response, only the faint sound of footsteps, now faster, heading toward Melissa's room. Panic surged through me as I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and bolted out of bed. I reached her door, throwing it open, my heart pounding in my ears. Inside, the room was still, too still. A dark figure stood beside her bed, its form barely visible in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I was frozen in place, but as I blinked, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving only the oppressive silence in its wake. I stood there, heart hammering in my chest, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Had it been real? A shadow? My imagination? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that Melissa was still lying in bed, seemingly undisturbed by the eerie presence that had been there just moments before. I took a tentative step into her room, my eyes darting around, searching for any sign of the figure that had vanished. Nothing. The room was empty, save for Melissa's quiet breathing. My fingers tightened around the lamp I had grabbed as a weapon, my pulse pounding in my ears. Melissa, I whispered, my voice shaky. Are you okay? She stirred slightly but didn't wake. I walked closer to her bed, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Then, my gaze fell to her stomach. A lump, a large swollen lump just below her ribcage, pulsating unnaturally beneath her skin. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt beside the bed, hands trembling as I gently pulled her pajama shirt up. The sight that greeted me made my stomach turn. The lump was moving, shifting, like something alive was writhing beneath her skin. I reached out instinctively but pulled back, horrified. I had no idea what I was seeing. Mum, Melissa mumbled in her sleep, wincing slightly as if the lump was causing her pain. Her voice snapped me out of my stupor. I had to do something. Melissa, I said, louder this time, shaking her awake. Melissa, wake up! Her eyes fluttered open, groggy and confused. What's happening? She asked, her voice thick with sleep. She glanced down at her stomach and immediately paled, her eyes widening in horror. Mom, what is that? She cried, her voice trembling. I don't know, baby, I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though my own fear was spiraling out of control. But we're going to figure it out. Just hold still. Before I could say anything else, the lump twitched violently, and Melissa screamed in pain. The skin around the lump split open with a sickening squelch, and to my horror, hundreds of tiny legs began to crawl out of the wound. Cockroaches. Hundreds of them spilling from her belly, writhing and scuttling over the bed, the floor, my hands. I screamed, backing away in horror, my mind unable to process the nightmare unfolding in front of me. Melissa writhed in agony, clawing at her stomach as more and more cockroaches poured out, her body convulsing violently. "Help me," she whimpered, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes wide with terror. I reached out to her, but my hand was shaking so badly that I could barely touch her. "Melissa, stay with me," I begged, my voice cracking. "I'm going to get help." But as soon as the words left my mouth, her body went limp, her skin turning pale and waxy as the cockroaches continued to swarm from the gaping wound in her stomach. Blood pooled around her, staining the sheets a dark, ominous red. My legs gave out from under me, and I collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself, rocking back and forth. "This can't be real." But the sight before me, the cockroaches, the blood, Melissa's lifeless body, was very real. Too real. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed by fear and grief. Minutes, hours, it all blurred together. But then I heard it. The slow, deliberate sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. Someone was in the house. My heart leaped into my throat as I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the lamp again, my only weapon. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky and hoarse. No response, just the footsteps growing louder, closer. Then they stopped. Silence. The vent cover in the bathroom clattered to the floor, the metallic sound reverberating through the house. My pulse quickened as the footsteps started again, faster this time, heading straight toward me. "Run," I told myself, "run now." I bolted from the room, barely able to keep my balance as I stumbled down the hallway. The cold air inside the house seemed to press in on me, making it hard to breathe. I reached the front door, fumbling with the lock in my panic, but before I could open it, an invisible force slammed into me. I flew across the room, crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. Pain shot through my body, and my vision blurred. Through the haze I saw her. Mrs. Mallock, the old woman who had sold me the house, stood at the foot of the stairs, her hunched figure bathed in the cold light of the moon. Her skin sagged from her bones, her eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity that made my blood run cold. "You thought you could escape," she hissed, her voice sharp and jagged like broken glass. "This house is mine. You belong to me now." I tried to move, but my body was too weak, my muscles limp and unresponsive. Mrs. Mallock cackled, her laughter echoing through the empty house as she shuffled closer. With one gnarled hand, she grabbed my chin, forcing my head up so that I had no choice but to look at her. "I'll make you beautiful again," she whispered, her breath rancid and hot against my face. From the pocket of her tattered dress, she pulled out a handful of writhing, squirming cockroaches. My stomach lurched, and I gagged as she forced my mouth open. "Open wide," she crooned, her voice dripping with malice. "They're hungry." I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat as she shoved the cockroaches into my mouth, their tiny legs scratching against the inside of my cheeks, crawling down my throat. I choked, gagging, tears streaming down my face as I struggled to breathe, the taste of rot and decay overwhelming me. Darkness crept in at the edges of my vision as Mrs. Mallock's laughter echoed in my ears. The world tilted, spinning wildly, before fading into nothing, and then silence. The last thing I felt was the cold, slimy sensation of the cockroaches squirming inside me. And then nothing at all. The wail of police sirens in the distance sounded like a far-off memory. Inside the small, cramped room, the noise felt irrelevant, almost muted by the thick silence that hung in the air. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. For a moment, I wasn't even sure if he was still breathing. The man sat slumped in the old, beaten armchair, surrounded by towering stacks of dusty books. His eyes, half-lidded and glazed over, stared at the television, which flickered with the dim glow of yet another police procedural show, the kind he apparently watched religiously. "So, is there anything else I need to know?" I asked Bailey, the nurse who was training me. I couldn't take my eyes off the old man as he sat unmoving, oblivious to the world around him. Bailey ran her hand through her dark bangs, pushing them away from her face. She seemed tired, eager to get out of the green scrubs she had worn all day. "Nope," she said. "He just sort of sits here, like this, all day long. Doesn't do much but watch TV and zone out. His son says he used to be a scholar, maybe an archaeologist or historian or something. A lot of those books are his. But now, she glanced back at him, sighing. Now he just sits. I nodded, taking it all in. The man was a ghost of who he once was, surrounded by remnants of a life that had long since passed him by. He didn't look dangerous, just gone. His wiry, uncombed hair stood up at odd angles, and his white beard had small flecks of drool. His red and black checkered robe was draped loosely over his frail body. It was hard to believe this man had once been anything more than what he was now, a shadow, living in his chair. "Let me show you where you'll sleep," Bailey said, interrupting my thoughts. We left the room and walked down a narrow hallway. The walls were painted a dark blue, and the floor was scuffed hardwood, creaking beneath our feet with every step. Open doors revealed rooms cluttered with more books. They were everywhere, on shelves, tables, and even scattered across the floor. The house was an organized chaos, drowning in books that nobody had touched in years. "This place could use some tidying up," I muttered. Bailey chuckled. "We're nurses, not maids. His son can hire a cleaning service if he wants it straightened up." She pushed open a door to reveal a small lime-green room. "This is you," she said. The room had a queen-size bed neatly made with dark grey sheets and a matching comforter. A modern wood and metal nightstand sat beside it, with a small lamp resting on top. It wasn't much, but it was clean and comfortable. I set my backpack down on the bed and plugged my phone charger into the wall. "So you said you already fed him?" I asked. Bailey nodded. "Yep. All you have to do tonight is put him to bed. Sometimes he falls asleep in the chair, and I just leave him there. He likes it better that way, I think." I raised an eyebrow. "What does he usually eat for breakfast?" "Fruit, yogurt, easy stuff," Bailey said, shrugging. "Honestly, the job's pretty easy. You'll have time to relax, read or sleep. Not much to it." I watched her check her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed a message. She was restless, itching to leave. "Do you think you'll need anything else?" she asked, already halfway out the door. "I think I'm good," I replied. "Thanks." "All right," she said, pulling out her keys. "I'll be back in a couple of days to take over. Call me if you need anything, but trust me, you won't." She gave a quick wave and disappeared out the front door, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I walked back to the room where the old man sat. The television continued to blare with gunfire and shouting from the police show he was watching, but his eyes were now closed. His chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of sleep. I stood there for a moment, watching him. He seemed so peaceful, lost in whatever world his dreams had taken him to. Deciding to leave the TV on, I quietly shuffled back to my room. The bed was more comfortable than I had expected, and I found myself scrolling through TikTok, relaxing as the minutes slipped away. I woke to the sound of something groaning, wood, maybe, or the old house settling. My eyes fluttered open, and I noticed that the room was now completely dark. I had fallen asleep without realizing it. The door to my room was slightly ajar, creaking slowly as if someone had gently pushed it open. "Hello?" I whispered into the darkness, my heart picking up speed. Was it Bailey checking on me? No, she had left hours ago. I rubbed my eyes, trying to focus. I could hear the faint sound of voices from the television in the living room, but there was something else. A light scraping noise, like nails dragging across wood, came from somewhere close. I sat up in bed and reached for the lamp. The room lit up, revealing nothing out of place, but the scraping continued. I got out of bed, my curiosity winning over my fear, and peeked out into the hallway. The faint glow from the television bathed the house in a dull, flickering light. Everything looked normal. The man must still be asleep in his chair. I closed the door again and slipped back into bed. I turned the light off and closed my eyes, trying to convince myself that it was just the house settling, but then the door creaked open again, this time wider. My breath caught in my throat as I saw him. The old man. He stood in the doorway, hunched over, his robe dragging on the floor. His eyes, wide and wild, stared straight ahead, unblinking. His mouth was agape, as if frozen in a perpetual scream. His hair stood up in wiry tufts, and he shuffled into the room with slow, deliberate steps. I stayed perfectly still, pretending to be asleep, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. He didn't make a sound as he moved around the room, inspecting every corner, every piece of furniture, his eyes darting around like an animal searching for prey. Then I saw it. In his hand, gripped tightly, was a knife. Panic shot through me. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Why was he holding a knife? What was he doing? But I couldn't move. I couldn't let him know I was awake. He inched closer, his eyes never leaving me. I could feel his presence looming over me, his breath shallow and raspy. The knife gleamed in the dim light, catching the reflection of the flickering television down the hall. Then he chuckled, a low guttural sound that made my skin crawl. Without a word, he turned and shuffled out of the room, leaving the door wide open behind him. I lay there, frozen in terror, barely able to breathe. What had just happened? I needed to get out, now. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my phone and moving toward the door as quietly as I could. I peeked out into the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. The house was still, the only sound coming from the television, but he was somewhere in the house, walking around, knife in hand. I took a step into the hallway, the floor creaking beneath me. The sound seemed deafening, and I winced, knowing I had given myself away. "You don't have to hide," the old man's voice echoed through the house, his tone low and menacing. The footsteps picked up, shuffling and dragging as they grew closer. I panicked, darting into another room and closing the door behind me. The room was musty and dark, filled with even more books. It looked like no one had been in there for years. My eyes scanned the room for a hiding spot, and I quickly crawled under the bed just as the door swung open. "Are you in here?" the old man croaked, his voice dripping with malice. I held my breath, my body shaking with fear as I listened to him shuffle around the room. I could see his feet, the hem of his robe brushing the floor as he moved slowly, methodically. "We are going to end this," he hissed, his voice growing more erratic. "I've been waiting for so long." He paused, standing still for a moment. I could feel him searching, sensing that I was close. I prayed he wouldn't find me. Not here. Not like this. After what felt like an eternity, he shuffled out of the room. I peeked out from under the bed, my pulse racing. The door was open, but the old man was gone. I needed to run. Now. I slid out from under the bed and crept toward the hallway. I could still hear him, muttering to himself as he wandered the house. I had to get to the front door. I had to leave before he found me again. As I neared the living room, I stopped. Something was off. The light from the television cast a shadow on the floor, but it wasn't the old man's shadow. It was something else, something darker, something inhuman. Curiosity got the better of me, and curiosity got the better of me, and despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I peeked around the corner toward the living room. The flickering light from the television illuminated the room just enough to make out a figure standing directly in front of it. At first glance, it looked like the old man, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't him at all. The figure was tall, far taller than the old man, with a hunched posture and skin that seemed stretched and wrinkled, like a leather hide left out in the sun too long. Its movements were jerky, almost mechanical, and it stood there as if transfixed by the television screen. My blood ran cold as I stared at it, trying to process what I was seeing. The creature's head twisted unnaturally, slowly turning toward me with a series of sickening cracks. As it did, I realized with mounting horror that it had no eyes, just smooth, empty sockets where they should have been. Its mouth hung open, revealing rows of jagged, crooked teeth, dripping with some kind of dark, viscous liquid. The creature hissed, its mouth contorting into a grotesque grin as it took a step toward me. Its movements were slow, deliberate, like a predator toying with its prey. My heart slammed in my chest, and every muscle in my body tensed, screaming for me to move. But I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly it lunged. In that moment, every instinct kicked in, and I turned and bolted down the hallway, the creature's footsteps thundering behind me. Its breath was ragged and wet, like it was choking on its own spit, and every step it took echoed in the empty house. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled toward the front door, adrenaline the only thing keeping me going. "I'm leaving and calling the police!" I shouted as I reached the front door, my voice shaking with panic. I fumbled with the lock, my hands slick with sweat, but the door wouldn't budge. The creature was faster than I thought. In the blink of an eye, it was right behind me, its twisted limbs reaching out. I screamed as I felt its slimy, cold hands grab onto my shoulders, yanking me backward. I kicked and struggled, but its grip was impossibly strong. The stench of rotting meat filled my nose as it pulled me down to the floor, pinning me in place. "Get off me!" I shrieked, my voice raw with terror as I thrashed beneath it. Its mouth hovered above me, snapping at the air, its teeth inches from my face. The sound of bones cracking and wet, slurping noises filled my ears as it moved closer, preparing to bite. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the rasping voice of the old man. "I've been waiting for you to show again," he bellowed, his voice ragged but filled with unexpected strength. I opened my eyes just in time to see the old man plunge a knife deep into the creature's skull. The blade sunk in with a sickening squelch, and thick, dark blood oozed from the wound, splattering across my face. The creature let out a horrific screech, its body convulsing as it released me and flailed wildly. The old man yanked the knife free and raised it high above his head before driving it down again, sinking the blade into the creature's neck. Each strike was accompanied by the sound of bones crunching and flesh tearing. The creature screeched louder, its cries growing weaker and weaker until finally it went still. I lay there on the floor, gasping for breath, my heart racing as the reality of what had just happened washed over me. The creature, whatever it was dead. The old man stood over its lifeless body, panting heavily, the knife dripping with its dark blood. I wiped the blood from my face, shaking uncontrollably as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. The old man glanced at me, his face pale and gaunt, but there was something in his eyes, something knowing, as if he had expected this all along. "What the hell was that?" I stammered, struggling to get to my feet. My legs felt weak, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. "That," the old man rasped, leaning heavily on the knife, "was called using bait." "Bait," I repeated, incredulous. "What are you talking about?" He wiped the blood from the knife on his robe and gave me a crooked smile. "You," he said simply, "were the bait." I stared at him in shock, my mind reeling. "You knew this would happen? You knew that thing would come?" He nodded slowly, his expression grim. "It's been coming for a long time. It's been watching, waiting, and I've been waiting too. Knew it'd show up again eventually. That's why I needed someone here, someone it would want." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the realization hit. I had been lured here, used, unknowingly, as bait to draw out the creature. "Why me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Why did it want me?" The old man shrugged, his frail body sagging as he finally sat down in a nearby chair. "I don't know. Doesn't matter now. It's dead, and you're still alive." But what was that thing?" I asked, my voice rising in desperation. "How do you know about it?" The old man's eyes flickered with a mixture of sadness and something darker. "There's things in this world, things people don't talk about, things that hide in the shadows, waiting. Sometimes they take a special interest in certain people, and when that happens, well, you do whatever it takes to survive." I didn't know what to say. My head was spinning, my body still trembling from the encounter. The creature's blood was still sticky on my skin, and the smell of death lingered in the air. "You're lucky I was here," the old man muttered, as if reading my thoughts. "But now that it's over, you should leave. Get out of here. Don't come back." I didn't need to be told twice. I staggered to my feet, my body aching as I stumbled toward the front door. My fingers fumbled with the lock again, but this time the door opened easily. The cool night air hit me like a wave, and I stepped outside, gasping for breath, as if I had just resurfaced from drowning. As I stood on the porch, the sounds of the police sirens grew louder, closer. The neighbors must have heard the commotion. I looked back at the house, my heart still racing. The old man sat inside, staring blankly at the dead creature on the floor, the television still flickering with the image of a police procedural show. I turned and ran, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. And I knew one thing for certain. I would never return to that house. Recently, my grandmother Beryl died, shed no tears. She was old and lived an amazing life. I was with her at the end. I sat by her bed, holding her frail hand and silently crying. She had slipped into a coma, and the odds of her coming out of it were slim. And Slim had left 10 minutes ago, right before she left for good. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at me and whispered my name. I looked up, stunned that I could see her fading baby blues, and called out for my mom. My grandma beckoned me to come closer. I leaned as close to her as I could get, and in a tired, raspy voice she said, "I'm afraid I'll see him again." I asked who, but she shut her eyes and laid back down. Her internal clock slowed as her head hit the pillow. As soon as my mum came into the room, Grandma left us. I held my mum and we cried into each other's shoulders until our shirts were soaked. Not my best day. When Mum and I went through Grandma's things, I told her what Grandma had said to me right before she expired. I asked if she had any idea what she was talking about. Mum was silent for a beat, but then shook her head. No. Who knows what was going on inside her mind right before the end? I don't think it was anything specific. Is this related to her moving to Iowa all those years ago? This had been a sticking point between my family and I since I found out about it. My family had been born and raised in Minnesota for generations before Grandma had up and left one night years ago. She never talked about it. Once I learned this weird fact, I asked her. She would always dodge the answer, typically by promising me ice cream. What can I say? I'm bought off cheap. But with her gone, I thought this might be the time to learn the family secret. Why had Grandma left Minnesota? Why the big secret? Who was she worried she'd see again? I knew my mum wouldn't answer, if she even knew, but I held out hope my grandma had journaled about these experiences. Grandma was an avid journalist, but unlike most people, she didn't write her daily musing like they were a list of things she'd accomplished. No, she wrote them like she was telling a story. More than once, my mum caught me engrossed in a journal instead of cleaning the house. My mum punished me by assigning me to clothes donation duty. She hardly missed a day, and there were boxes of journals in her closets. Her will said she wanted them given over to the University of Iowa. She thought maybe they'd learn something from her daily writings, what life was like for a quasi-radical middle American housewife during the country's golden age. We were finishing up moving these boxes around when I noticed a small gap in the timeline of the journals. The ones from around the time she'd fled Minnesota were missing. I informed Mum about it, and she gave me one of Grandma's patent non-answers. I wasn't satisfied with that response, though. Worse, Mum didn't even promise me ice cream. Later that night, I went looking for the lost journals. I hoped I'd find answers to questions I asked for 20 years. I went through her entire bedroom with a fine-tooth comb and found zilch. Less than zilch. It was as if these things had just vanished. It was possible she burned it, but Grandma had hoarder tendencies, and I couldn't see her doing that. These dumb journals were gone. Out of frustration, I kicked the inside of her closet wall. My foot easily broke through the drywall. I started coughing from the particulates in the air. My spasming lungs would not keep me from seeing the hole I'd just booted in the wall. As I got closer, I realized I hadn't kicked through drywall. It was foam made to look like drywall. Inside, I found the journals I'd been looking for. I devoured them in one sitting. A lot of my questions found answers. That said, those answers just spawned more questions. Questions I knew no one in my circle, not even my mum, could answer. So, I throw it out to you, Reddit. What the hell happened here? If anyone knows anything about the group my grandma's ex started, please let me know. May 2nd, 1961. I think the Lord just spoke to me. Paul, my loving husband of 10 years, told me this as soon as he entered our apartment. I looked up from my paperback and stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. He was being serious. I didn't realize how serious until I saw that he had tears in his eyes. "What?" was all I could think to say. "I heard the word," he said, his voice catching. He spoke to me. Paul was not the most religious man. Sure, we went to church on Sundays, but neither of us would call ourselves devout. He'd always grouse about missing the first few innings of the Twins games. The Twins were his new obsession. They'd just moved from Washington, and Paul was worried that if the city didn't embrace them, they might leave for greener pastures. As for myself, I'd been feeling a serious spiritual disconnect from the church for years, and was going now out of obligation and not faith. Not that I would tell anyone that publicly. You couldn't go around talking about how you didn't believe in God in Minneapolis in the year of our Lord 1961. That's a good way of losing your invite to bunco night. "Start from the beginning," I said, still confused. "I was closing up the shop," he said, "and I'd gone into the basement to make sure the sidewalk cellar door was locked, and I heard someone say, 'I am the truth,' as clear as day. Maybe someone was on the street. You can hear people through the cellar door," I said. I thought that too, but there wasn't anyone out there. Why do you think it was Jesus? Who else would call themselves the truth? Why would he tell you? I don't know, but I know I heard it. "What do you want to do?" I asked, unsure of how to handle this. My mother told me all kinds of tips and hints about having a happy marriage. Be loyal, make him comfortable, be his biggest supporter, learn how to make his favorite cocktail, etc. But there had never been any discussions on what to do if your husband hears uttering from the divine. "I don't know," he said. "He touched my soul. Beryl, I need a drink, I think." "That I can do," I said, putting down my book and heading to the bar. He sat on the couch, but he was a million miles away. Something had happened, but I didn't think Jesus made house calls. I gave him a heavy paw, hoping it'd relax him. When Paul latches onto something, it can consume him to the point where he forgets to do basic things like eat and sleep. "Jesus Christ spoke to me tonight," he said out loud, but mostly to himself. "I am the truth. What do you think that means?" "Maybe you can talk to Father Jones," I said as I handed him his drink. "If anyone else has potentially heard the Lord speak, my money is on him." Paul thanked me for the booze and gulped most of it down in one swig. I could tell he was inside his own head, and any attempt at conversation would be met with silence or anger. I grabbed my book and mentioned taking a quick bath before bed. I left him contemplating his spiritual awakening. I was at a good part in my book anyway. May 9th, 1961. I thought the Jesus stuff would pass, but he still focused on it a week later. He hadn't had another conversation with the Lord, but he did speak to Father Jones. The old priest listened to Paul's whole story patiently and offered him some pretty milquetoast answers. "We all hear the word. Make sure you heed it. Following in Jesus' footsteps is not bad advice to follow." Paul left unfulfilled. The following day, he went to the library and checked out 6 books on Christianity and prophecy. He focused on others who'd heard from Jesus or God. I popped into the pharmacy before leaving to run errands. I was surprised to find Paul hunched over an open book, furiously scribbling notes onto a pad. I couldn't help but chuckle. Paul pulled his head out of the book and met my eyes. "What are you reading?" "Book on prophets," he said. "A lot of them heard an audible voice too." "Are there any outside witnesses that can corroborate that claim?" I asked, and my old university studies came back to me. "I believe them. I wouldn't have a week ago, but—" He trailed off. "What happened to these prophets?" "Some went on to start their own church. Some became disillusioned with humans and fled to nature. Some went crazy and killed themselves or others. It's a mixed bag." "Well, thank God you were just a one-off. The thought of living in nature after we spent our savings getting this apartment and storefront makes me queasy. Oh, and not being part of a murder-suicide thing is nice too." "Beryl, please." I was going to respond, but he dove back into his book. I rolled my eyes and left. I didn't mind when Paul got obsessed with things. It's part of his charm. But I wasn't a fan of this current obsession. Somewhat ironically, I prayed he'd end it soon and come back to his senses. May 17th, 1961. 2 days later, Paul had to go to a conference 2 towns over. He didn't want to go, said he felt bad putting me out. I said it was nonsense, plus we'd already paid for a hotel room. He reluctantly left, and I watched over the store. I'd worked in the pharmacy before and knew what I was doing, but there was a pall over the place this time. People weren't unkind, but weren't friendly either. It felt like being at a funeral. Later, when I retired to my apartment, I heard something moving in the shop. I pressed my ear to the ground to hear better. Sure enough, it sounded like someone was rifling through things. I didn't panic. I simply called the police, grabbed the scariest-looking knife I had, double-checked my locks, and waited for them to arrive. They checked out the store and said a few boxes had fallen, but everything else seemed to be in order. I went down with them and confirmed. They asked about my husband and I told him where he had gone. They said they'd return tomorrow to talk to him about it before leaving. They checked out the store and said a few boxes had fallen, but everything else seemed to be in order. I went down with them and confirmed. They asked about my husband and I told him where he had gone. They said they'd return tomorrow to talk to him about it before leaving. I watched them drive off when something outside caught my eye. It was the cellar doors to the storage area. One of them had been pushed open. The police would have seen that during their inspection, so I assumed they had popped them up to check the alley and just left it open. I went into the storage room and saw the lights from the street lamps reflecting on the cellar stairs. I hustled across the room and quickly shut and locked the doors. As I turned to go back up, I felt something caress my foot. I jumped up but didn't see anything. I heard a box fall to the ground next to me. I snapped my head in that direction in time to see the tail end of a giant rat scurry into the darkness. I started laughing. I'd been so keyed up that another person had been in here that I'd never even assumed it'd be a rat. The following day, Paul arrived and told me he found a dead rat outside the cellar door. He threw it in the trash and hoped no one had seen it. He told me its head was missing. May 23rd, 1961. He spoke to me again. Paul said, he told me, go forth and herd them. Go forth and herd? I asked. Does that make you the shepherd? No, he said, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Jesus is the shepherd. I'm more like the staff he wields. I keep the herd in line. I said, not wanting to show my complete disapproval, but to let him know I have some reservations about this whole thing. Maybe you should start going to church twice a week, or see if you can volunteer. They're always looking for helpers for bingo and the Friday fish fry. I don't know, Paul said. Doesn't seem grand enough for someone hearing the Saviour's voice. Are you sure that's what it is? Not a radio or something? It's the word of the Lord. Beryl, he said sharply. I know the difference between Paul Harvey and Jesus. Okay, no need to get upset. Just looking for solutions. You do believe me, right? I let the question bounce around my skull before I blurted anything out. A yes from me would be a sign of encouragement. A no would crush his spirits. I needed an old-fashioned Minnesota nice answer that walks the line between both. I'm just making sure you're not rushing into anything is all. He laughed. If there was something to rush towards, it would be the open arms of Jesus. I needed to shift gears. This was fertile ground for a fight, and I wasn't in the mood. Hey, I was talking with Martha the other day, and she wanted to know if we wanted to go a Twins game this weekend. I don't have time for games, he said. I want to finish this book about numerology in the Bible. Did you know the number 4 appears frequently in the book of Revelations? I need a drink. You? No, I need to stay sharp, he said. The word won't come to a man drunk on earthly pleasures. I grabbed the bottle of rum. I contemplated just taking a long pull from the bottle, but I'm a lady, so I made myself a mixed drink and retired to the bedroom to get some quiet. June 3rd, 1961. 2 voices were coming up from the shop. There shouldn't have been 2 voices coming from the shop, especially after closing. I walked down to the pharmacy and found Paul deep in conversation with a bookish-looking fellow who seemed familiar. They both shut up as soon as I hit the bottom step. What's going on? I asked, trying to be as friendly as possible. This is Chuck. Hi, Chuck said. Are you a rep from one of the medical companies? I asked, confused. Nope, I actually buy my aspirin here. He's helping me with the biblical messages. I love mysteries, Chuck added. I told you about it the other night, about the messages in the book of Revelations. The number 4 thing? He laughed. Chuck laughed. I was confused. We've gone way beyond that, he said. We're discovering new stuff in here that corresponds with the recent messages. What recent messages? Paul hesitated. I doubled down and asked again. He smiled and asked if he could speak to me in the next aisle. What messages? I asked a third time. The Lord. He's speaking to me pretty frequently. What? I asked, laughing out of shock. It's daily. I wasn't supposed to tell you. Says who? Chuck? Paul waited for a beat and then pointed up at the sky. I decided to play dumb. The roofer. He said you'd mock me. I'm not mocking you, I said. I'm confused, and, quite frankly, when have I ever mocked you? Did you believe me? That's a different thing altogether. Did you know that, historically, the first supporter of a prophet is their spouse? But when a spouse doesn't believe, it causes issues within the marriage. Wait, I said, my anger rising. A prophet? Who else hears the word of the Lord but a prophet? You own and operate a local pharmacy. Paul, how does that make you a prophet? God selected me, and I heard. Simple as that. Not to mention, Jesus has recently shown me many things. You're having visions now? I asked incredulously. Not yet, but they've told me what passages in the Bible really mean. It's been an eye-opening experience. What has it said? It's a lot to go over. When the time is right to tell you, I will. Have you told Chuck? Which? Also, what the hell is Chuck doing here? Beryl. Language. Don't blaspheme. Saying hell isn't committing blasphemy, or did the voice not go over the proper grammar with you? I knew I'd stepped over the line but didn't care. I was heated, and this little obsession was getting out of hand. I mean, there was a convert in my house now. He said you'd act like this, Paul said. The doubts of the unbelievers can cloud my mind. What did the last voice say? You're just going to insult me, he said, which you shouldn't do in general, but especially not in front of Chuck. Fine, I said. I promise I won't insult you. Paul sighed. He told me my first sheep would find its way to me. The next day, Chuck saw what I was reading and started asking questions. Before we knew it, he agreed to help work on this with me. Uh-huh. You said you won't insult me. I haven't, I said, biting my tongue so hard I drew blood. I could taste the metallic tang in my mouth. Go on. Paul smiled. I think he's my first sheep. Where do you hear the voices? In the basement, near the cellar door. I'm going down there, I said, to see if I hear anything. You won't, he said. I'm still trying. I walked out of the aisle, shot Chuck a warm smile, and headed down the basement stairs to storage. As I made my way down, I heard Paul tell Chuck that I was having some womanly issues and should be fine. I promised myself I would give the prophet Paul a good punch in the arm later. I walked down into the basement storage area and flipped on the light. I hated coming down here at the best of times, but it was the worst at night. It was already so dark in this room, and the lack of sunlight streaming through the slight cracks in the cellar door made it 10 times worse. But I was bound in the armor of a doubting Thomas, so I pushed my fears aside and made my way over to where Paul hears his divine messages. I stood for 10 minutes not making a sound. No voice spoke to me, no God, Jesus or Jack Benny, all remained as quiet as a prayer. I rolled my eyes and headed back upstairs to the apartment. I wanted to get a head start on giving Paul the cold shoulder. June 10th, 1961. A week later, besides a Chuck, there was now a Greg, a Dan, a Dawn, a Joy, and a Tom. Most of these people were customers, but Joy and Tom were Chuck's friends. He told them what he and Paul had been doing, and they were intrigued. So they started coming too. They wouldn't be the last. More and more strangers moved through my life. The after-work gatherings became an everyday thing, and their tenor changed. When only Chuck was hanging around, he and Paul seemed to discuss biblical prophecy and the voices Paul heard. But now that a congregation was in the basement, the meetings took on a different tenor. Paul spoke like he was preaching to them, and the group ate it up. They looked at him like he had answers to their problems. He called them Paulites, and they responded well to it. I couldn't get this man to put his dishes in the sink, yet these people thought he knew the answers to cosmic mysteries. I was floored. Paul never told me about the new messages. I asked once, and he said the voices told him to spare the message from non-believers. I asked him when I had been shifted to non-believer status, and he didn't elaborate. I tried a few times to coax a message from the voice in the basement, but rolled a snake eyes every time. Paul had been more distant in the last week. At first I was okay with it because he seemed to enjoy himself, but the meetings started running to midnight, and I got lonely. I tried to go down there once or twice, but he always told me to head up. I'd be bored. I said I was curious, but he turned me away. I talked to Mum about it, and she said it's odd, but most men need a hobby they share with friends. She reminded me that Daddy was a member of the lodge and would hang out with those guys a few nights a week. What Paul was doing seemed similar, if not more church-related. She said it was good that you knew where and who he was with. I couldn't disagree, but it still sat funny with me. That seed of a funny feeling soon bloomed into a flowering issue when I heard Paul and Chuck discussing how many cots they could fit in the storeroom. I didn't want to interrupt them while they were talking, but I did sit on the stairs and listen. Paul said it would be better for the disciples to stay here. Chuck said he could easily build 2 or 3 rooms with the space down here if Paul was willing to shuffle around the boxes. Paul said that wouldn't be an issue. He also told Chuck he wanted to build a shrine to the voice, a holy site, he called it. Chuck said that wouldn't be an issue. After the group had left, I confronted Paul. I asked him what was going on and why he was going to build bedrooms downstairs. He said I wasn't allowed to know, as I was not a member of the Immaculate Voice of the Lord. I said, as the leaseholder of the pharmacy, I had every right to know. I'd contact the city about code violations if he didn't tell me. Paul relented. He told me he'd discovered hidden messages in the Book of Revelations, thanks to the Lord's clues. As he told people, he found that some truly believed him. The group started as Bible study, but quickly became one that felt the need to splinter away from any known doctrines and strike out on their own. The more formal churches were just parroting back words and beliefs from ancient voices. His church was getting the words straight from the horse's mouth. I didn't judge, but I did ask why he felt he couldn't share this with his wife. Had I not initially encouraged his passion project? Why was he keeping these secrets from me? He hemmed and hawed, but after some more precision-targeted questions, he finally spilled the beans. The voice told him to not tell me. I asked why Jesus would tell Paul to spread the word about his religion but not tell his wife. He said the voice told him I would do anything to stop the church from forming. The day of cleansing would never come if I was successful. Day of cleansing? I asked. It's the day when the truth is revealed to the world. The non-believers will... Well, that's not important. No, you need to say. He sighed. They die and are sent to hell. You want me to go to hell? No. I want you to come along with me, but I'm being blocked from including you. The voice says that you don't have enough faith. You ask too many questions. Paul, darling, are you sure there even is a voice? He started laughing. The Lord said you'd say that. It's why I can't preach to you. Your doubt encapsulates you like unholy armor. There is no way to penetrate it. I think I'm going to stay at my mum's house, I said, slowly backing away from him. I need some time to think. Please don't, he said, his tone changing. I can teach you my ways and school you in the education of the Immaculate Voice doctrine. It'll bring us closer, both in this life and the next. His eyes were pleading, and I again saw the face of the boy I had fallen for all those years ago. My body wanted to embrace him, but my brain held firm. I'll stay tonight, okay? But no promises about tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll take us into your heart, he said, smiling. I love you. Let's get some sleep. Huh? June 11th, 1961. I reached over in the middle of the night and felt an empty space next to me. Paul was gone. I looked around, but he wasn't in the apartment. I assumed he was downstairs, either in the pharmacy or the storeroom. I prayed it was the pharmacy, but I knew where I'd find him. I moved as silently as a ghost until I got to the shop floor. It was pitch black outside, save for the lampposts that lined the street. They gave the avenue an orange glow that most people never see, because most decent people are asleep at this hour. I walked toward the door to the storeroom and found it already opened. A light was on down there, and I heard mumbling but couldn't make out any words. I softly took the first few steps, making sure I didn't give away my position. Paul's voice was still muffled, but I could hear every other word. It seemed he was talking to someone, but I never heard another voice speak back. Then I realized he was probably talking with the voice. I made my way down the stairs and ducked behind some of the boxes of medicine. If he really looked, he'd spot me easily, but overlook me if he just glanced. I settled in and cocked my ear toward him. What I heard from him made the blood drain from my face and my body shake. If she leaves, who will we use to secure your arrival? Without her body, you cannot rise. There was silence for a few seconds until Paul started laughing. It wasn't the fun, friendly chuckle I had swooned over during study sessions in poli-sci. It was maniacal. Thy will be done, Father. With that, Paul shut off the light and walked back upstairs. Sitting alone in the dark, I realized two things. My marriage was obviously over, and the Paulites were going to kill me. I needed to go, now. The quickest way out was through the cellar doors. I'd figure out the details later, but fleeing this nightmare was paramount. As quietly as possible, I undid the latches and pushed open the metal doors, stepping half up the ladder to softly lay them on the sidewalk. Before leaving, though, I looked back at the room and spat. Till death do us part. No thanks, you can have him. The air around me becomes charged. It made my skin tingle. From the dark void of the room, I heard a deep voice croak. Your end is here, child. Fuscus locutus est. I took Latin in college and had attended church since I could walk. This wasn't Jesus or God or anything holy speaking to Paul. He was being deceived. Jesus doesn't call himself the Dark One, but I knew who did. As my brain tried to reconcile this information, a bloody, severed rat head landed square on my foot. I charged up those stairs and out onto the street. I ran as far as my lungs would take me. All I heard were my bare feet slapping on the sidewalk and deep, evil laughter echoing from the basement. I never looked back. There was nothing I wanted to see anyway.